Hello, Tom. How's it going? I was just trying to find a nice video to have during reading time. Hello, Zara. Hello, Swan. Hello, Scott. And Sheridan and Balin and Headland. I found one. It does have a little subscribe button in the bottom. But maybe that's okay. What if how do I get back to my campaigns? If I update the thingamabob, what you call it? What are the words I'm trying to say? The overlay. What would it be under? Branding? Overlays. Is there something? Add widget. What could I put in the bottom? A dancing Kermit? Is that good? Cause logo? Aha! Okay, I'm going to put that in the bottom. Save changes. Has that... Oh, has that not updated? Here for story time. Good luck, Bronchi. We're here. Ah, it's not raining. It's a video I found that has the rain. I thought it would be a nice cozy background for story time. Wait, would that have changed the... Wait, if I do reopen... Now I've put this in the corner. Let me see if this will change. Wait, Tiltify, properties. Can I refresh it maybe? Huh. That would see your full screen in your library reading. No. That would have to just be on my phone, and I feel like that would be a bad time. Can I not make it any bigger? How am I gonna... Why is it not saving? Do I need to... If I... I don't know. Is there a way to refresh? No. Well, it's just going to say subscribe in the corner. So, there you have it. I thought this one was nice because it has a cat. Can't wait to hear the Minotaur book. Oh, no. No! I would like to eventually set up the reading room for maybe being able to do streams. If I put my old mic in there or something. Maybe that could work. Why is this... I don't understand why it's not working. I'll tell you what I could do. I could just... Nibbles. Rabbit. Rescue. I can do this manually. Can I find their logo myself? Oh, it's not on a background. Save image as. Where's my desktop? Desktop. Nibbles. Save. And then we're going to add it. Plus. Image. Nibbles. Okay, and then browse. We're doing it live. Nibbles. Okay. There we go. I've covered the subscribe button. The Tiltify overlay didn't want to do it, but I've done it manually, so it's fine. Nice. Okay, right. I shall start to read. So today's book is Carmilla by Sheridan Fanu. I don't know if I'm saying any of those words right. But here it is, a vampire book. I have also found a Halloween soundboard So I don't know if I'm going to use any of them, but on the off chance that there's something spooky happening, I've got noises like bats. Spooky. And there's a door, but the door goes on for a really long time, so I probably won't use the door. But there's clock. Oh. Spooky. There's a lot of bongs. Play the door. Okay, this is how long the door takes to play. It's like that door takes so long to open. But there you go. I hope the vampire doesn't drop 14 pipes. We can only hope. We can only hope. Okay, right. So I've got my soundboard if needed. Okay, I will try not to break up the words too much between any woos. There was a werewolf one, I think. Wolf pack. £1 drive, let's go. Oh my gosh. Oh, stop the awoos. I've just realised it has the price on the back and the feel of the label was driving me mad, so I'm just going to take that off. Oh no, it's one of those really like falling apart ones. Wah! Okay, right. Let's go. We don't need the history of William Collins. I don't even know who William Collins is. Oh, it's a Collins classic, so that explains it. The Life and Times of William Collins? Nope. Nope. Okay. I hope you're all sitting comfortably. Make the woo the dono noise just every £1. Whoa, whoa, whoa. Okay. Let's go. This is the prologue. Or prologue. If there's any words that I pronounce wrong, I figure the best way to do it, I'm just going to power through them. And I'm sorry if that annoys people. Just pretend that it's a fun new way of saying things. Because I don't know how to pronounce a lot of words. But I'll try my best to make it flow and not get stumbled upon words I don't know. That rhymed. Okay. Carmilla by Sheridan Le Fanu. Thank you, hands up. Upon a paper attached to the narrative which follows, Dr. Hesilius has written a rather elaborate note, which he accompanies with a reference to his essay on the strange subject which the manuscript illuminates. This mysterious subject he treats, in that essay, with his usual learning and acumen, and with remarkable directness and condensation. It will form but one volume of the series That Extraordinary Man's Collected Papers. As I publish the case in this volume, simply to interest the laity, I shall forestall the intelligent lady who relates it. In nothing and after due consideration, I have determined, therefore, to abstain from presenting any précis of the learned doctor's reasoning, or extract from his statement on a subject which he describes as involving not improbably some of the profoundest arcana of our dual existence and its intermediates. I was anxious on discovering this paper to reopen the correspondence commenced by Dr. Hesilius so many years before, with a person so clever and careful as his informant seems to have been. Much to my regret, however, I found that she had died in the interval. She probably could have added little to the narrative, which she communicates in the following pages, with, so far as I can pronounce, such conscientious peculiarity. Chapter 1. An Early Fright. What book? Carmilla! Not that you can read from that, but Carmilla is the book. And it's chapter 1. I didn't really understand the prologue, so let's see how we get on with the story itself. In Styria, We, though by no means magnificent people, inhabit a castle or schloss. A small income in that part of the world goes a great way. 800 or 900 a year does wonders. Scantily enough, as would have answered among wealthy people at home. My father is English, and I bear an English name, although I never saw England. But here in this lonely and primitive place, where everything is so marvellously cheap, I really don't see how ever so much more money would at all material add to our comforts, or even luxuries. My father was in the Austrian service, and retired upon a pension and his patrimony, and purchased this feudal residence in the small estate on which it stands, a bargain. Nothing can be more picturesque or solitary. It stands on a slight eminence in a forest. The road, very old and narrow, passes in front of its drawbridge, never raised in my time, and its moat, stocked with perch and sailed over by many swans, and floating on its surface white fleets of water lilies. Over all this the Schloss shows its many-windowed front, its towers, and its Gothic chapel. The forest opens in an irregular and very picturesque glade before its gate, and at the right a steep Gothic bridge carries the road over a stream that winds in deep shadow through the woods. I have said that this is a very lonely place. Judge whether I say truth. Looking from the hall door towards the road, the forest in which our castle stands extends 15 miles to the right and 12 to the left. The nearest inhabited village is about 7 of your English miles to the left. The nearest inhabited schloss of any historic associations is of that of old General Spielsdorf, nearly 20 miles away to the right. I have said the nearest inhabited village because there is only 3 miles westward, that is to say in the direction of General Spielsdorf Schloss, a ruined village with its quaint little church, now roofless, in the aisle of which are mouldering tombs of the proud family of Kernstein, now extinct, who once owned the equally desolate chateau which, in the thick of the forest, overlooks the silent ruins of the town. Respecting the cause of the desertion of this striking and melancholy spot, there is a legend which I shall relate to you another time. I must tell you now how very small is the party who constitute the inhabitants of our castle. I don't include servants or those dependents who occupy rooms in the building attached to the schloss. Listen and wonder. My father, who is the kindest man on earth but growing old, and I, at the date of my story, only 19, 8 years have passed since then. I and my father constituted the family at the schloss. My mother, a Styrian lady, died in my infancy, and I had a good-natured governess who had been with me from, I might almost say, my infancy. I could not remember the time when her fat, benignant face, I don't know this word, lovely face, was not a familiar picture in my memory. This was Madame Perrodon, a native of Bern, whose care and good nature now in part supplied me to the loss of my mother, whom I do not even remember, so early I lost her. She made a third at our little dinner party. There was a fourth, Mademoiselle de la Fontaine, a lady such as you term, I believe, a finishing governess. She spoke French and German, Madame Perrodon French and broken English, to which my father and I added English, which, partly to prevent its becoming a lost language among us, and partly from patriotic motives, we spoke every day. The consequence was a Babel, at which strangers used to laugh, and which I shall make no attempt to reproduce in this narrative. And there were 2 or 3 young lady friends besides, pretty nearly of my own age, who were occasional visitors for shorter or longer terms, and these visits I sometimes returned. These were our regular social resources, but of course there were chance visits from our neighbours of only 5 or 6 leagues distance. My life was, notwithstanding, rather a solitary one, I can assure you. My governance had just so much control over me as you might conjecture such sage persons would have in the case of a rather spoiled girl, whose only parent allowed her pretty nearly her own way in everything. The first occurrence in my existence, which produced a terrible impression upon my mind, which, in fact, never has been effaced, was one of the very earliest incidents of my life which I can recollect. Some people will think it so trifling that it should not be recorded here. You will see, however, by and by, why I mention it. The nursery, as it was called, though I had it all to myself, was a large room in the upper story of the castle, with a steep oak roof. I can't have been more than 6 years old when one night I awoke and looked around the room from my bed, failed to see the nursery maid. Neither was my nurse there, and I thought myself alone. I was not frightened, for I was one of those happy children who are studiously kept in ignorance of ghost stories, of fairy tales, and of all such lore as makes us cover up our heads when the door cracks suddenly, or the flicker of an expiring candle makes the shadow of a bedpost dance upon the wall nearer to our faces. I was vexed and insulted at finding myself, as I conceived, neglected, and I began to whimper preparatory to a hearty bout of roaring, when to my surprise I saw a solemn but very pretty face looking at me from the side of the table. It was that of a young lady who was kneeling with her hands under the coverlet. I looked at her with a kind of pleased wonder and ceased whimpering. She caressed me with her hands and lay down beside me on the bed and drew me towards her, smiling. I felt immediately delightfully soothed and fell asleep again. I was wakened by a sensation as if 2 needles ran into my breast, very deep at the same moment, and I cried loudly. The lady stared back at me, with her eyes fixed on me, and then slipped down upon the floor and, as I thought, hid herself under the bed. I was now for the first time frightened, and I yelled with all my might and main. Nurse, nursery maid, housekeeper, all came running in, and hearing my story they made light of it, soothing me all they could meanwhile. But, child as I was, I could perceive that their faces were pale with an unwonted look of anxiety, and I saw them look under the bed and about the room, and peep under tables and pluck open cupboards, and the housekeeper whispered to the nurse, "Lay your hand along that hollow in the bed. Someone did lie there, so sure as you did not. The place is still warm." I remember the nursery maid petting me, and all 3 examining my chest where I told them I felt the puncture, and pronouncing that there was no sign visible that any such thing had happened to me. The housekeeper and the other 2 servants, who were in charge of the nursery, remained sitting up all night, and from that time a servant always sat up in the nursery until I was about 14. I was very nervous for a long time after this. A doctor was called in. He was pallid and elderly. How well I remember his long saturnine face, slightly pitted with smallpox, and his chestnut wig. For a good while every day he came and gave me medicine, which of course I hated. The morning after I saw this apparition, I was in a state of terror and could not bear to be left alone, daylight though it was, for a moment. I remember my father coming up and standing at the bedside and talking cheerfully and asking the nurse a number of questions and laughing very heartily at one of the answers, and patting me on the shoulder and kissing me and telling me not to be frightened and that it was nothing but a dream and could not hurt me. But I was not comforted, for I knew the visit of the strange woman was not a dream, and I was awfully frightened. I was little consoled by the nursery maid's assurance that it was she who had come and looked at me and lay down beside me in the bed, and that I must have been half dreaming not to have known her face. But this, though supported by the nurse, did not quite satisfy me. I remember in the course of that day a venerable old man in a black cassock coming into the room with the nurse and housekeeper and talking a little to them, and very kindly to me. His face was very sweet and gentle, and he told me they were going to pray, and joined my hands together and desired me to say softly whilst they were praying, "Lord, hear all good prayers for us, for Jesus' sake." I think those were the very words, for I often repeated them to myself and my nurse, used for years to make me say them in prayer. I remember so well the thoughtful, sweet face of that white-haired old man in his black cassock, as he stood in that rude, lofty brown room with the clumsy furniture of a fashion 300 years old about him, and the scanty light entering in its shadowy atmosphere through the small lattice. He kneeled, and the 3 women with him, and he prayed aloud with an earnest, quavering voice for what appeared to me a long time. I forgot all of my life preceding that event, and for some time after it is all so obscure also. But the scenes I have just described stand out vivid as the isolated pictures of the phantasmagoria surrounded by darkness. End of chapter 1. JD, thank you so much for the £50. You and the bunnies have provided rays of sunshine in tough times since I discovered you a year or so ago, so I'm happy for this way to say thank you. Thank you. Thank you very much. I'll try and read donors between chapters so as not to disrupt too much. But thank you. That's very kind of you. Okay. Chapter 2. A guest. I am now going to tell you something so strange that it will require all of your faith in my veracity to believe my story. It is not only true, nevertheless, but truth of which I have been an eyewitness. It was a sweet summer evening, and my father asked me, as he sometimes did, to take a little ramble with him along that beautiful forest vista which I have mentioned as lying in front of the Schloss. General Spielsdorf cannot come to us so soon as I had hoped, said my father as we pursued our walk. He was to have paid us a visit of some weeks, and we had expected his arrival the next day. He was to have brought with him a young lady, his niece and ward, Mademoiselle Reinfeld, who I had never seen before, but whom I had heard described as a very charming girl, and in whose society I had promised myself many happy days. I was more disappointed than a young lady living in a town or a bustling neighbourhood can possibly imagine. This visit, and the new acquaintance it promised, had furnished my daydreams for many weeks. "And how soon does he come?" I asked. "Not till autumn. Not for 2 months, I dare say," he answered. "And I am very glad now, dear, that you never knew Mademoiselle Reinfeld." "And why?" I asked, both mortified and curious. "Because the young lady is dead," he replied. "I quite forgot I had not told you, but you were not in the room when I received the General's letter this evening." I was very much shocked. General Spielsdorf had mentioned in his first letter 6 or 7 weeks before that she was not so well as he wished her, but there was nothing to suggest the remotest suspicion of danger. "Here is the General's letter," he said, handing it to me. "I am afraid he is in a great affliction. The letter appears to me to have been written very nearly in distraction." We sat down on a rude bench, upon a group of magnificent lime trees. The sun was setting with all its melancholy splendour behind the sylvan horizon, and the stream that flows beside our home and passes under the steep old bridge I have mentioned wound through many a group of noble trees, almost at our feet, reflecting in its current the faded crimson of the sky. General Spielsdorf's letter was so extraordinary, so vehement, and in some places so self-contradictory that I read it over twice. The second time aloud to my father, and was still unable to account for it, except by supposing that grief had unsettled his mind. It said, "I have lost my darling daughter, for as such I loved her. During the days of dear Bertha's illness, I was not able to write to you, but before then I had no idea of her danger. I have lost her, and now learn all too late. She died in the peace of innocence, and in the glorious hope of a blessed blessed future, let's say. The fiend who betrayed our infatuated hospitality has done it all. I thought I was receiving into my house innocence, gaiety, a charming companion for my lost Bertha. Heavens, what a fool I have been! I thank God my child died without suspicion or the cause of her sufferings. She is gone without so much as conjecturing the nature of her illness, and the accursed passion of the agent of all this misery. I devote my remaining days to tracking and extinguishing a monster. I am told I may hope to accomplish my righteous and merciful purpose. At present, there is scarcely a gleam of light to guide me. I curse my conceited incredulity, my despicable affection of superiority, my blindness, my obstinacy, all too late. I cannot write or talk collectedly now. I am distracted. So soon as I shall have a little recovered, I mean to devote myself for a time to inquiry, which may possibly lead me as far as Vienna. Sometime in the autumn, 2 months hence, or earlier if I live, I will see you. That is, if you permit me. I will then tell you all that I scarce dare put upon paper now. Farewell. Pray for me, dear friend. In these terms ended the strange letter. Though I had never seen Bertha Reinfeld, my eyes filled with tears at the sudden intelligence. I was startled, as well as profoundly disappointed. The sun had now set, and it was twilight by the time I had returned the General's letter to my father. It was a soft, clear evening, and we loitered, speculating upon the possible meanings of the violent and incoherent sentences which I had just been reading. We had nearly a mile to walk before reaching the road that passes the Schloss in front, and by that time the moon was shining brilliantly. At the drawbridge we met Madame Perrodon and Mademoiselle de la Fontaine, who had come out, without their bonnets, to enjoy the exquisite moonlight. We heard their voices gabbling in animated dialogue as we approached. We joined them in the drawbridge and turned about to admire with them the beautiful scene. The glade through which we had just walked lay before us. At our left, the narrow road wound away under clumps of lordly trees and was lost to the sight amid the thickening forest. At the right, the same road crosses the steep and picturesque bridge, near which stands a ruined tower which once guarded that pass. And beyond, the bridge, an abrupt eminence rises, covered with trees and showing in the shadows some grey ivy-clustered rocks. Over the sward and low grounds a thin film of mist was stealing like smoke, marking the distances with transparent veil, and here and there we could see the river faintly flashing in the moonlight. No softer, sweeter image could be imagined. The news I had just heard made it melancholy, but nothing could disturb its character of profound serenity and the enchanted glory and vagueness of the prospect. My father, who enjoyed the picturesque, and I, stood looking in the silence at the expanse beneath us. The two good governesses, standing a little way behind us, discoursed upon the scene, and were eloquent upon the moon. Madame Perrodon was middle-aged and romantic, and talked and sighed poetically. Mademoiselle de la Fontaine, in right of her father, who was a German, assumed to be psychological, metaphysical, and something of a mystic, now declared that when the moon shone with a light so intense, it was well known that it indicated a special spiritual activity. The effect of the moon in such a state of brilliancy was manifold. It acted on dreams, it acted on lunacy, it acted on nervous people. It had marvellous physical influences connected with life. Mademoiselle related that her cousin, who was a mate of a merchant ship, having taken a nap on deck on such a night, lying with his back with his face in full in the moonlight, had wakened after a dream of an old woman clawing him by the cheek, with his features horribly drawn to one side, and his countenance had never quite recovered its equilibrium. "The moon this night," she said, "is full of idyllic and magnificent influence. And see, when you look behind you at the front of the Schloss, how all its windows flash and twinkle with that silvery splendour, as if unseen hands had lighted upon the rooms to receive fairy guests. There are indolent styles of the spirits in which, indisposed to talk ourselves, the talk of others is pleasant to our listless ears, and I gazed on, pleased with the tinkle of the ladies' conversation. I have got into one of my moping moods tonight, said my father after a silence, and quoting Shakespeare, whom, by way of keeping up our English, he used to read aloud, he said, "In truth, I know not why I am sad. It wearies me, if you say it wearies you. But how I got it, came by it. I forget the rest, but I feel as if some great misfortune were hanging over us. I suppose that the poor General's afflicted letter has something to do with it." At this moment, the unwonted sound of carriage wheels and many hoofs upon the road arrested our attention. They seemed to be approaching from the high ground overlooking the bridge, and very soon the equipage emerged from that point. The horseman first across the bridge, then came a carriage drawn by 4 horses, and 2 men rode behind. I don't have a horse noise, I've only got footsteps. Imagine it's horses. It seemed to be the travelling carriage of a person of rank, and we were all immediately absorbed in watching that very unusual spectacle. It became in a few moments greatly more interesting, for just as the carriage had passed the summit of the steep bridge, one of the leaders, taking fright, communicated his panic to the rest. And after a plunge or two, the whole team broke into a wild gallop together, and dashing between the horsemen who rode in front, came thundering along the road towards us with the speed of a hurricane. The excitement of the scene was made more painful by the clear, long-drawn screams of a female voice from the carriage window. I have one of those. Bloody hell. Thank you. Thank you, Soundport. Thank you, Anonymous. We all advanced in curiosity and horror, me rather in silence, and the rest with various ejaculations of terror. Our suspense did not last long. Just before you reach the castle drawbridge, on the route they were coming, there stands by the roadside a magnificent lime tree. On the other stands an ancient stone cross, at sight of which the horses, now going at a pace that was perfectly frightful, swerved so as to bring the wheel over a projecting root of the tree. I knew what was coming. I covered my eyes, unable to see it out, and turned my head away. At the same moment I heard a cry from my lady friends who had gone on a little. Curiosity opened my eyes, and I saw a scene of utter confusion. 2 of the horses were on the ground, and the carriage lay upon its side with 2 wheels in the air. The men were busy removing the traces, and a lady with a commanding air and figure had got out and stood with clasped hands, raising the handkerchief that was in them every now and then set to her eyes. Through the carriage door was now lifted a young lady, who appeared to be lifeless. My dear old father was already beside the elderly lady, with his hat in his hand, evidently tendering his aid and the resources of his schloss. The lady did not appear to hear him, or to have eyes for anything but the slender girl who was being placed against the slope of the bank. I approached. The young lady was apparently stunned, but she was certainly not dead. My father, who piqued himself on being something of a physician, had just had his fingers on her wrist and assured the lady, who declared herself her mother, that her pulse, though faint and irregular, was undoubtedly still distinguishable. The lady clasped her hands and looked upwards as if in a momentary transport of gratitude, but immediately she broke out again in that theatrical way which is, I believe, natural to some people. She was what is called a fine-looking woman for her time of life, and must have been handsome. She was tall, but not thin, and dressed in black velvet, and looked rather pale, but with a proud and commanding countenance, though now agitated strangely. "Whoever was being so born to calamity," I heard her say, with clasped hands as I came up. "Here I am on a journey of life and death, in prosecuting which to lose an hour is possible to lose it all. My child will not have recovered sufficiently to resume her route for who can say how long? I must leave her. I cannot dare delay. How far on, sir, can you tell, is the nearest village? I must leave her there, and shall not see my darling or even hear of her till my return, 3 months hence." I plucked my father by the coat and whispered earnestly in his ear, "Oh, Papa, pray ask her to stay here with us. It would be so delightful. Do pray." "If Madame will entrust her child to the care of my daughter and of her good governante, Madame Peridon, and permit her to remain as our guest under my charge until her return, it would confer a distinction and an obligation upon us, and here we shall treat her with all the care and devotion which so sacred a trust deserves." "I cannot do that, sir. It would be to task your kindness and chivalry too cruelly," the lady distractedly said. "It would, on the contrary, be to confer on us a great kindness at the moment when we most need it. My daughter has just been disappointed by a cruel misfortune, in a visit from which she has long since anticipated a great deal of happiness. If you confide this young lady to our care, it will be her best consolation." The nearest village on your route is distant, and affords no such inn as you think of placing your daughter at. You cannot allow her to continue her journey for any considerable distance without danger. If, as you say, you cannot suspend your journey, you must part with her tonight, and nowhere could you do so with more honest assurances of care and tenderness than here." There was something in this lady's air and appearance so distinguished and even imposing, and in her manner so engaging, as to impress one, quite apart from the dignity of her equipage, with a conviction that she was a person of consequence. By this time the carriage was replaced in its upright position, and the horses quite tractable in the traces again. The lady threw on her daughter a glance which I fancied was not quite so as affectionate as one might have anticipated from the beginning of the scene. Then she beckoned slightly to my father, and withdrew 2 or 3 steps with him out of hearing. She talked to him with a fixed and stern countenance, not at all like that with which she had spoken hitherto. I was filled with wonder that my father did not seem to perceive the change, and was also unspeakably curious to learn what it would be that she was speaking, almost in his ear, with so much earnestness and rapidity. 2 or 3 minutes at most, I think she remained thus employed. Then she turned, and a few steps brought her to where her daughter lay, supported by Madame Perrodon. She kneeled beside her for a moment, and whispered, as Madame supposed, a little benediction in her ear, then hastily kissed her, and stepped into the carriage. The door was closed, the footmen in stately liveries jumped up behind, the outriders spurred on, the postilions cracked their whip, the horses plunged, and broke suddenly into a furious canter that threatened soon again to become a gallop. The carriage whirred away, followed at some rapid pace by the 2 horsemen in the rear. End of chapter 2. I need a drink. I'm surprised the soundboard doesn't have a clip-clop. A little clip-clop of hoops. Posture check. Thank you. I started the book Bunny today. Bunny? Okay. Is Carmilla the point of view person? I think Carmilla is... I don't actually know. I don't think she's been named yet. I'm not sure. It just said she had an English name. I think that's the only hint we've had. Chapter 3. We compare notes. We followed the cortege with our eyes until it was swiftly lost to a sight in the misty woods, and the very sounds of the hooves and the wheels died away in the silent night air. Nothing remained to assure us that the adventure had not been an illusion of a moment but the young lady, who just at that moment opened her eyes. I could not see, for her face was turned from me, but she raised her head, evidently looking about her, and I heard a very sweet voice ask complainingly, "Where is Mamma?" Our good Madame Perrodon answered tenderly, and added some comfortable assurances. I then heard her ask, "Where am I? What is this place?" And after that she said, "I don't see the carriage. And Matska? Where is she?" Madame answered all of her questions, insofar as she understood them, and gradually the young lady remembered how the misadventure had come about. I was glad to hear that no one in or in attendance on the carriage was hurt, and on learning that her mamma had left her there till her return in about 3 months, she wept. I was going to add my consolations to those of Madame Perrodon when Mademoiselle de la Fontaine placed her hand upon my arm, saying, "Don't approach. One at a time is as much as she can present converse with. I have very little excitement would possibly overpower her now. As soon as she is comfortably in bed, I thought, I will run up to her room and see her." My father, in the meantime, had sent a servant on horseback for the physician, who lived about 2 leagues away, and a bedroom was being prepared for the young lady's reception. The stranger now rose, and leaning on Madame's arm, walked slowly over the drawbridge and into the castle gate. In the hall, servants waited to receive her, and she was conducted forthwith to her room. The room we usually sat in for our drawing-room is long, having 4 windows that looked over the moat and drawbridge upon the forest scene I have just described. It is furnished in old carved oak, with large carved cabinets, and the chairs are cushioned with crimson Utrecht velvet. The walls are covered with tapestry, and are surrounded with great gold frames, the figures being as large as life in ancient and very curious costumes, and the subjects represented are hunting, hawking, and generally festive. It is not too stately to be extremely comfortable, and here we had our tea, for with his usual patriotic leanings he insisted that the national beverage should be making its appearance regularly with our coffee and chocolate. We sat here this night, with the candles lighted, and talked over the adventure of the evening. Madame Perrodon and Mademoiselle de la Fontaine were both of our party. The young stranger had hardly lain down in her bed when she sank into a deep sleep, and those ladies had left her in the care of a servant. "How do you like our guest?" I asked as Madame entered. "Tell me all about her." "I like her extremely," answered Madame. "She is, I almost think, the prettiest creature I ever saw, about your age, and so gentle and nice." "She is absolutely beautiful," threw in Mademoiselle, who had peeped for a moment into the stranger's room. "And such a sweet voice," added Madame Perrodon. "Did you remark a woman in the carriage after... Oh, who's reading this? Did you remark a woman in the carriage after it was set up again who did not get out?" inquired Mademoiselle, "but only looked from the window?" "No, we had not seen her." Then she described a hideous woman who was gazing all the time from the carriage window, nodding and grinning derisively towards the ladies, with gleaming eyes and large white eyeballs, and her teeth set as if in a fury. "Did you remark what an ill-looking pack of men the servants were?" asked Madame. "Yes," said my father, who had just come in. "Ugly, hang-dog-looking fellows as ever I beheld in my life. I hope they mayn't rob the poor lady in the forest. They are clever rogues, however. They got everything to its rights in a minute." "I dare say they are worn out with too long travelling," said Madame. "Besides, looking wicked, their faces were so strangely lean and dark and sullen, and I am very curious, I own, but I dare say the young lady will tell you all about it tomorrow. She is sufficiently recovered." Oh, I don't think she will," said my father, with a mysterious smile and a little nod of his head, as if he knew more about it than he cared to tell us. This made us all the more inquisitive as to what had passed between him and the lady in the black velvet, in the brief but earnest interview that had immediately preceded her departure. We were scarcely alone when I entreated him to tell me. He did not need much pressing. Who is reading this bit? Aha! "There is no particular reason why I should not tell you. She expressed a reluctance to trouble us with the care of her daughter, saying she was in a delicate health and nervous, but not subject to any kind of seizure. She volunteered that, nor to any illusion, being in part perfectly sane." "How very odd, I say to all that," I interpolated. "Why, it was not so necessary." "At all events, it was said," he laughed. "And as you wish to know all that passed, which was indeed very little, I tell you. She then said, 'I am making a journey of vital importance.' She emphasized that word, rapid and secret. I shall return for my child in 3 months. In the meantime, she will be silent as to say who we are, whence we come, and whether we travel. That is all she said. She spoke very pure French. When she said the word secret, she paused for a few seconds, looking stern, her eyes fixed on mine. I fancy she makes a great point of that. You saw how quickly she was gone. I hope I have not done a very foolish thing in taking charge of that young lady." For my part, I was delighted. I was longing to see and talk to her, and only waiting till the doctor should give me leave. You, who live in towns, can have no idea how great an event the introduction of a new friend is, in such a solitude as surrounded us. The doctor did not arrive until nearly 1 o'clock, but I could no more have gone to my bed and slept than I could have overtaken on foot the carriage in which the princess in black velvet had driven away. When the physician came down to the drawing-room, it was to report very favourably upon our patient. She was now sitting up, her pulse quite regular, apparently perfectly well. She had sustained no injury, and Little shock to her nerves had passed away while she was quite harmless. There could be no harm, certainly, in my seeing her, and if we both wished it, with his permission sent, forthwith I know whether... I'm going to start that bit again. There are so many commas in this bit. Right. There could be no harm, certainly, in my seeing her, if we both wished it, and, with this permission I sent forthwith to know whether she would allow me to visit her for a few minutes in her room. The servant returned immediately to say that she desired nothing more. You may be sure I was not long in availing myself out of this permission. Our visitor lay in one of the handsomest rooms in the Schloss. It was perhaps a little stately. There was a sombre piece of tapestry opposite the foot of the bed, representing Cleopatra with the asps to her bosom, and some other solemn classic scenes were displayed, a little faded, upon the other walls. But there was gold carving and rich and varied colour enough in the other decorations of the room to more than redeem the gloom of the old tapestries. There were candles at the bedside. She was sitting up, her slender, pretty figure enveloped in the soft silk dressing gown embroidered with flowers and lined with thick quilted silk, which her mother had thrown over her feet as she lay upon the ground. What was it that, as I reached the bedside that had just begun my little greeting, struck me dumb in a moment and made me recoil a step or two before her? I will tell you. I saw the very face which had visited me in my childhood at night, which remained so fixed in my memory, and on which I had for so many years ruminated with horror, when no one suspected of what I was thinking. It was pretty, even beautiful, and when I first beheld it, wore the same melancholy expression. But this almost instantly lighted into a strange fixed smile of recognition. There was a silence of fully a minute, and then at length she spoke. I could not. "How wonderful!" she exclaimed. 12 years ago I saw your face in a dream, and it has haunted me ever since." "Wonderful indeed," I repeated, overcoming with an effort the horror that had for a time suspended my utterances. 12 years ago, in vision or reality, I certainly saw you. I could not forget your face. It has remained before my eyes ever since." Her smile had softened. Whatever I fancied strange in it was gone, and it and her dimpling cheeks were now delightfully pretty and intelligent. I felt reassured and continued more in the vein which hospitality indicated, to bid her welcome and to tell her how much pleasure her accidental arrival had given us all, and especially what a happiness it was to me. I took her hand as I spoke. I was a little shy, as lonely people are, but the situation made me eloquent and even bold. She pressed my hand, she laid it upon hers, and her eyes glowed as, looking hastily into mine, she smiled again and blushed. She answered my welcome very prettily. I sat down beside her, still wondering, and she said, "I must tell you about my vision about you. It was also very strange that you and I should have had, each of the other, so vivid a dream. That each should have seen, I, you, and you, me, looking as we do now, when of course we were both mere children. I was a child about 6 years ago, and I awoke from a confused and troubled dream and found myself in a room, unlike my nursery, wainscoted clumsily in some dark wood, with cupboards and bedsteads and chairs and benches placed about it. The beds were, I thought, all empty, and the room itself without anyone but myself in it. And I, after looking about me for some time and admiring especially an iron candlestick with 2 branches, which I should certainly know again, crept under one of the beds to reach the window. But as I got from under the bed, I heard someone crying, and looking up while I was still upon my knees, I saw you, most assuredly you, as I see you now, a beautiful young lady with golden hair and large blue eyes and lips, your lips, you as you are here. Your looks won me. I climbed on the bed and put my arms about you, and I think we both fell asleep. I was aroused by a scream, and you were sitting up screaming. I was frightened, and slipped down upon the ground, and it seemed to me lost consciousness for a moment. And when I came to myself, I was again in my nursery at home. Your face I have never forgotten since. I could not be misled by mere resemblance. You are the lady whom I saw. It was now my turn to relate my corresponding vision, which I did, to the undisguised wonder of my new acquaintance. I don't know which should be most afraid of the other, she said again, smiling. If you were less pretty, I think I should be very much afraid of you. But being as you are, and you and I being so young, I feel only that I could have made your acquaintance 12 years ago and have already a right to your intimacy. At all events, it does seem as if we were destined from our earliest childhood to be friends. I wonder whether you feel as strangely drawn towards me as I do to you. I have never had a friend. Shall I find one now? She sighed, and her fine dark eyes gazed passionately on me. Now the truth is, I felt more accountably towards the beautiful stranger. I did feel, as she said, drawn towards her. But there was also something of repulsion. In this ambiguous feeling, however, the sense of attraction immensely prevailed. She interested and won me. She was so beautiful and so indescribably engaging. I perceived now something of languor and exhaustion stealing over her, and hastened to bid her good night. The doctor thinks, I added, that you ought to have a maid to sit up with you tonight. One of ours is waiting, and you will find her a very useful and quiet creature. How kind of you, but I could not sleep. I never could with an attendant in the room. I shan't require assistance, and shall I confess my weakness? I am haunted with a terror of robbers. Our house was robbed once, and 2 servants murdered, so I always locked my door. It has become habit, and you look so kind, I know you will forgive me. I see there is a key in the lock. She held me close in her pretty arms for a moment, and whispered in my ear, Good night, darling. It is very hard to part with you, but good night. Tomorrow, but not early, I shall see you again. She sank back onto the pillow with a sigh, and her fine eyes followed me with a fond and melancholy gaze. She murmured again, Good night, dear friend. Young people like and even love on impulse. I was flattered by the evident, though as yet undeserved, fondness she showed me. I liked the confidence with which she at once received me. She was determined that we should be very near friends. The next day came, and we met again. I was delighted with my companion, that is to say, in many respects. Her looks lost nothing in daylight. She was certainly the most beautiful creature I had ever seen, and the unpleasant remembrance of the face presented in my early dream had lost the effect of the first unexpected recognition. She confessed that she had experienced a similar shock on seeing me, and precisely the same faint antipathy that had mingled with my admiration of her. We now laughed together over our momentary horrors. End of chapter 3. There you go. I'm going to have a little sippy again. Welcome in people who joined partway. Thank you for the follow. What's the cat's name? Carmilla? I don't know. A pudding tat. Little pudding. Okay. I shall go into chapter 4, which is her habits, a saunter. I told you that I was charmed with her in most particulars. There were some that did not please me so well. She was above the middle height of women. I shall begin by describing her. She was slender and wonderfully graceful, except that her movements were very languid indeed. There was nothing in her appearance to indicate an invalid. Her complexion was rich and brilliant. Her features were small and beautifully formed. Her eyes large, dark, and lustrous. Her hair was quite wonderful. I never saw hair so magnificently thick and long when it was down about her shoulders. I have often placed my hands under it and laughed with wonder at its weight. It was exquisitely fine and soft, and in a rich colour, very dark brown, with something of gold. I loved to let it down, tumbling with its own weight as, in her room, she lay back in her chair, talking in her sweet, low voice. I used to fold and braid it, and spread it out and play with it. Heavens, if I had but known all. I said there were particulars which did not please me. I have told you that her confidence won me in the first night I saw her, but I found that she exercised with respect to herself, her mother, her history, everything in fact connected with her life, plans and people, an ever-waking reserve. I dare say I was unreasonable. Perhaps I was wrong. I dare say I ought to have respected the solemn injunction laid upon my father by the stately lady in black velvet, but curiosity is a restless and unscrupulous passion, and no one girl can endure with patience that hers should be baffled by another. What harm could it do to anyone? Could it do anyone to tell me what I so ardently desired to know? Had she no trust in my good sense or humour? Or honour? Why would she not believe me when I assured her so solemnly that I would not divulge one syllable of what she told me to any mortal breathing? There was a coldness, it seemed to me, beyond her years, in her smiling melancholy, persistent refusal to afford me the least ray of light. I cannot say we quarrelled upon this point, for she would not quarrel upon any. It was, of course, very unfair of me to press her, very ill-bred, but I really could not help it, and I might just as well have let it alone. What she did tell me amounted in my unconscionable estimation to nothing. It was all summed up in three very vague disclosures. First, her name was Carmilla. Second, her family was very ancient and noble. Third, her home lay in the direction of the west. She would not tell me the name of her family, nor their armorial bearings, nor the name of their estate, nor even that of the country they lived in. You are not to suppose that I worried her incessantly on these subjects. I watched opportunity and rather insinuated than urged my inquiries. Once or twice, indeed, I did attack her more directly, but no matter what my tactics, utter failure was invariably the result. Reproaches and caresses were all lost upon her, but I must add this, that her evasion was conducted with so pretty a melancholy and depreciation, with so many and even passionate declarations of her liking for me, and trust to my honour, that with so many promises that I should at last know all, that I could not find it in my heart to be offended with her. She used to place her pretty arms about my neck, draw me to her, and lay her cheek to mine, murmuring with her lips near my ear, "Dearest, your little heart is wounded. Think me not cruel, because I obey the irresistible law of my strength and weakness. If your dear heart is wounded, my wild heart bleeds with yours. In the rapture of my enormous humiliation, I live in your warm life, and you shall die. Die sweetly, die into mine. I cannot help it. As I draw near to you, you in turn will draw near to others, and learn the rapture of that cruelty, which yet is love. So for a while seek to know no more of me and mine, but trust me with all your loving spirit." And when she had spoken such a rhapsody, she would press me more closely in her trembling embrace, and her lips in soft kisses gently glow upon my cheek. Her agitations and her language were unintelligible to me. From these foolish embraces, which were not of very frequent occurrence, I must allow, I used to wish to extricate myself, but my energies seemed to fail me. Her murmured words sounded like a lullaby in my ears, and soothed my resistance into a trance, from which I only seemed to recover myself when she withdrew her arms. In these mysterious moods, I did not like her. I experienced a strange tumultuous excitement that was pleasurable, ever and anon, mingled with a vague sense of fear and disgust. I had no distinct thoughts about her while such scenes lasted, but I was conscious of a love growing into adoration, and also of abhorrence. This I know is a paradox, but I can make no other attempt to explain this feeling. I now write, after an interval of more than 10 years, with a trembling hand, with a confused and horrible recollection of certain occurrences and situations in the ordeal through which I was unconsciously passing, though with a vivid and very sharp remembrance of the main current of my story. But I suspect in all lives there are certain emotional scenes, those in which our passions have been most wildly and terribly roused, that are all of the others that are most vaguely and dimly remembered. Sometimes, after an hour of apathy, my strange and beautiful companion would take my hand and hold it with a fond pressure, renewed again and again, blushing softly, gazing in my face with languid and burning eyes, and breathing so fast that her dress rose and fell with the tumultuous respiration. It was like the ardor of a lover. It embarrassed me. It was hateful and yet overpowering. And with gloating eyes she drew me to her, and her hot lips travelled along my cheek in kisses, and she would whisper almost in sobs, "You are mine. You shall be mine. You and I are one forever." Then she had thrown herself back in the chair, with her small hands over her eyes, leaving me trembling. "Are we related?" I used to ask. "What can you mean by all this? I remind you perhaps of someone whom you love, but you must not. I hate it. I don't know you. I don't know myself. When you look so and talk so." She used to sigh at my vehemence and turn away and drop my hand. Respecting these very extraordinary manifestations, I strove in vain to form any satisfactory theory. I could not refer to them affection or trick. It was mistakably the momentary breaking of the suppressed instinction and emotion. Was she, notwithstanding her mother's volunteered denial, subject to brief visitations of insanity? Or was there here a disguise and a romance? I had read in old storybooks of such things. What if a boyish lover had found his way into the house and sought to prosecute his suit in masquerade with the assistance of a clever old adventuress? But there were many things against this hypothesis, highly interesting as it was to my vanity. I could boast of no little attention such as masculine gallantry delights to offer. Between these passionate moments there were long intervals of commonplace, of gaiety, of brooding melancholy, during which, except that I detected her eyes so full of melancholy fire, following me, at times I might have been as nothing to her. Except in these brief periods of mysterious excitement, her ways were girlish, and there was always a languor about her, quite incompatible with the masculine system in a state of health. In some respects, her habits were odd, perhaps not so singular in the opinion of a town lady like you, as they appeared to rustic people. She used to come down very late, generally not till 1 o'clock. She would then take a cup of chocolate, but eat nothing. We then went out for a walk, which was a mere saunter, and she seemed almost immediately exhausted, and either returned to the schloss or sat on one of the benches that were placed here and there among the trees. This was a bodily languor, in which her mind did not sympathize. She was always an animated talker, and very intelligent. She sometimes alluded for a moment to her own home or mentioned an adventure or situation. On an early recollection which indicated a people of strange manners and described customs of which we knew nothing. I gathered from these chance hints that her native country was much more remote than I had first fancied. As we sat thus one afternoon under the trees, a funeral passed us by. It was that of a pretty young girl, who I had often seen, the daughter of one of the rangers of the forest. The poor man was walking behind the coffin of his darling. She was his only child, and he looked quite heartbroken. Peasants walked 2 and 2 came behind. They were singing a funeral hymn. I rose to mark my respect as they passed, and joined in the hymn they were sweetly singing. My companion shook me a little roughly, and turned surprised. She said brusquely, "Don't you perceive how discordant that is?" "Hello, thank you for the raid." "I think it very sweet, on the contrary," I answered, vexed at the interruption and very uncomfortable lest the people who composed the little procession would observe and resent what was passing. I resumed, therefore, instantly, and was again interrupted. "You pierce my ears," said Carmilla, almost angrily, and stopping her ears with her tiny fingers. "Besides, how can you tell that your religion and mine are the same? Your form wounds me, and I hate funerals. What a fuss! You must die. Everyone must die. And all are happy when they do it. Come home." "My father has gone on with the clergyman to the churchyard. I thought you knew she was to be buried today." "She? I don't trouble my head about peasants. I don't know who she is, answered Carmilla with a flash from her fine eyes. She is the poor girl who fancied she saw a ghost a fortnight ago, and she has been dying ever since, till yesterday when she expired. Tell me nothing about ghosts. I shan't sleep tonight if you do. I hope there is no plague or fever coming. Oh, this looks very like it, I continued. The swineherd's young wife died only a week ago, and she thought something seized her by the throat as she lay in her bed, and nearly strangled her. Papa says such horrible fancies do accompany some forms of fever. She was quite well the day before. She sank afterwards, and died before a week. Well, her funeral is over, I hope, and her hymns sung, and our ears shan't be tortured with that discord and jargon. It has made me nervous. Sit down here, beside me, sit close, hold my hand, press it hard, hard, harder. She had moved a little back, and we had come to another seat. She sat down. Her face underwent a change that alarmed and even terrified me for a moment. It darkened and became horribly livid. Her teeth and hands were clenched, and she frowned and compressed her lips while she stared down upon the ground at her feet. She trembled all over with a continued shudder as irrepressible as ague. Ague? Ague. Ague. All her energies seemed strained to suppress a fit, with which she was then breathlessly tugging, and at length a low convulsive cry of suffering broke from her. And gradually the hysteria subsided. There! That comes of strangling people with hymns. Oh, there! That comes of strangling people with hymns, she said at last. Hold me still. It is passing away. And so gradually it did, and perhaps to dissipate the sombre impression with which the spectacle had left upon me, she became unusually animated and chatty, and so we got home. This was the first time I had seen her exhibit any definable symptoms of that delicacy of health of which her mother had spoken of. It is the first time I had seen her exhibit anything like temper. Both passed away like a summer cloud, but never once afterwards did I witness on her part a momentary sign of anger. I will tell you how it happened. She and I were looking out of one of the long drawing-room windows, when there entered the courtyard over the drawbridge a figure of a wanderer whom I knew very well. He used to visit the Schloss generally twice a year. It was the figure of a hunchback, with the sharp, lean features that generally accompanied deformity. He wore a pointed black beard, and he was smiling from ear to ear, showing his white fangs. He was dressed in buff black and scarlet, and crossed with more straps and belts than I could count, from which hung all manner of things. Behind, he carried a magic lantern and 2 boxes, which I knew well, in one of which was a salamander, and in the other a mandrake. These monsters used to make my father laugh. They were compounded of parts of monkey, parrots, squirrels, fish, and hedgehogs, dried and stitched together with great neatness and startling effect. He had a fiddle, a box of conjuring apparatus, a pair of foils and masks attached to his belt, several other mysterious cases dangling about him, and a black staff with copper ferrules in his hand. His companion was a rough, spare dog that followed at his heel, but stopped short suspiciously at the drawbridge, and in a little while began to howl dismally. I have that. In the meantime, the mountebank, standing in the midst of the courtyard, raised his grotesque hat and made us all very ceremoniously bow, paying his compliments very volubly in the execrable French and German, not much better. Then, disengaging his fiddle, he began to scrape a lively air to which he sang with merry discord, dancing with ludicrous airs and activity that made me laugh in spite of the dog's howling. Then he advanced to the window with many smiles and salutations, and his hat in his left hand, his fiddle under his arm, and with a fluency that never took breath, he gabbled in a long advertisement of his accomplishments and the resources of various arts which he placed at our service, and the curiosities and entertainments which was in his power at our bidding to display. Will your ladyship be pleased to buy an amulet against the Albire which is going like the wolf I hear through these woods? He said, dropping his hat on the pavement. They are dying of it, right and left, and here is a charm that never fails, only pinned to the pillow, and you may laugh in his face. These charms consisted of oblong slips of vellum, with cabalistic ciphers and diagrams upon them. Carmilla instantly purchased one, and so did I. He was looking up, and we were smiling down upon him, amused. At least I can answer for myself. His piercing black eye, as he looked up into our faces, seemed to detect something that fixed for a moment in his curiosity. In an instant he unrolled a leather case full of all manner of odd little steel instruments. "See here, my lady," he said, displaying it and addressing me. "I profess, among other things less useful, the art of dentistry." "Plague take the dog," he interpolated. "Silence, beast!" He howls so that your ladyship can scarcely hear a word. Your noble friend, the young lady at your right, has the sharpest tooth, long, thin, pointed like an owl, like a needle. Ha! With my sharp and long sight, as I look up, I have seen it distinctly. Now, it happens to hurt the young lady, and I think it must. Here am I. Here are my file, my punch, my nippers. I will make it round and blunt, if her ladyship pleases. No longer the tooth of a fish, but of a beautiful young lady as she is. Hey! Is the young lady displeased? Have I been too bold? Have I offended her?" The young lady indeed looked very angry as she drew back from the window. "How dare he insult us so? Where is your father? I shall demand redress from him. My father would have had the wretch tied to the pump and flogged with a cart whip, and burnt to the bones with the cattle brand." She retired from the window a step or two and sat down. She had hardly lost sight of the offender when her wrath subsided as suddenly as it had risen, and she gradually recovered her usual tone and seemed to forget the little hunchback and his follies. My father was out of spirits that evening. On coming in, he told us that there had been another case very similar to the two fatal ones which had occurred lately. The sister of a young peasant on his estate, only a mile away, was very ill, had been, as she described it, attacked very nearly in the same way, and was now slowly but steadily sinking. "All this," said my father, "is strictly referable to natural causes. These poor people infect one another and their superstitions, and so repeat in imagination the terror that have infested their neighbours." "But that very circumstance frightens one horribly," said Carmilla. "How so?" inquired my father. "I am so afraid of fancying I see such things. I think it would be as bad as reality." "We're in God's hands. Nothing can happen without his permission, and all will end well for those who love him. He is our faithful creator. He has made us all and will take care of all of us." "Creator? Nature?" the young lady, in answer to my gentle father, said. "And this disease that invades the country is natural. Nature! All things proceed from nature, don't they? All things in the heaven and in the earth and under the earth act and live as nature ordains. I think so." "The doctor said he would come here today," said my father after a silence. "I want to know what he thinks about it, and what he thinks we had better do." "Doctors never did me any good," said Carmilla. "Then you have been ill?" I asked. "More ill than ever you were," she answered. "Long ago?" "Yes, a long time. I suffered from this very illness, but I forgot all of my pains and weakness, and they were not so bad as are suffered in the other diseases." "You were very young then?" "I dare say. Let us talk no more of it. You would not wound a friend." She looked languidly in my eyes and passed her arms around my waist lovingly and led me out of the room. My father was busy over some papers near the window. "Why does your papa like to frighten us?" said the pretty girl with a sigh and a little shudder. "He doesn't, dear Carmilla. It was the furthest thing from his mind." "Are you afraid, dearest?" "I should be very much if I fancied there was any real danger of my being attacked as those poor people were." "You are afraid to die?" "Yes, everyone is." "But to die as lovers may, to die together so that they may live together. Girls are caterpillars whilst they live in the world, to be finally butterflies when the summer comes. But in the meantime there are grubs and larvae. Don't you see? Each with their peculiar propensities, necessities, and structure. So says Monsieur Buffon in his big book in the next room. Later in the day, the doctor came and was closeted with Papa for some time. He was a skillful man of 60 and upwards. He wore powder and shaved his pale face as smooth as a pumpkin. He and Papa emerged from the room together, and I heard Papa laugh and say as they came out, "Well, I wonder at a wise man like you. What do you say to hippogriffs and dragons?" The doctor was smiling and made answer, shaking his head. "Nevertheless, life and death are mysterious states, and we know little of the resources of either." And so they walked on, and I heard no more. I did not then know what the doctor had been broaching, but I think I guess it for now. I mean, now. There we go. Boo, boo, boo. End of chapter 4. Ba-ba-bam. Are you guys all following okay so far? I'm worried that my reading skills are not very good for making it make sense. There are just so many sentences that have like 10 commas in, and I'm just like, parentheses upon parentheses. Okay. Also, I think Carmilla might be a vampire. I'm picking up that she's putting something down here. And follow, that's good. Okay. Good. Right. Chapter 5. No way. A wonderful likeness. This evening, there arrived from Gratz the grave, dark-faced son of the picture cleaner, with a horse and cart laden with 2 large packing cases, having many pictures in each. It was a journey of 10 leagues, and whenever a messenger arrived at the Schloss from our little capital of Gratz, we used to crowd about him in the hall to hear the news. This arrival created in our secluded quarters quite a sensation. The cases remained in the hall, and the messenger was taken charge of by the servants till he had eaten his supper. Then, with assistance, and armed with hammer, ripping chisel and turnscrew, he met us in the hallway, where he had assembled to witness the unpacking of the cases. Carmilla sat looking listlessly on, while one after the other the old pictures, nearly all portraits, which had undergone the process of renovation, were brought to light. My mother was of an old Hungarian family, and most of these pictures, which were about to be restored to their places, had come to us through her. My father had a list in his hand from which he read, as the artist rummaged out the corresponding numbers. I don't know that the pictures were very good, but they were undoubtedly very old, and some of them very curious also. They had for the most part the merit of being now seen by me, I may say, for the first time, for the smoke and dust of time had all but obliterated them. "There is a picture that I have not seen yet," said my father. "In one corner at the top of it is the name, as well as I could read, Marcia Karnstein, and the date 1698, and I am curious to see how it has turned out." I remembered it. It was a small picture about 1.5 feet high and nearly square, without a frame, but it was so blackened by age that I could not make it out. The artist now produced it, with evident pride. It was quite beautiful. It was startling. It seemed to live. It was an effigy of Carmilla. "Carmilla, dear, here is an absolute miracle. Here you are, living, smiling, ready to speak, in this picture. Isn't it beautiful, Papa? And see, even the little mole on her throat." My father laughed and said, "Certainly it is a wonderful likeness." But he looked away, and to my surprise seemed but little struck by it. He went on talking to the picture cleaner, who was also something of an artist, and discoursed with intelligence about the portraits or other works, which his art had just brought into light and colour, while I was more and more lost in the wonder when I looked more at the picture. "Will you let me hang this picture in my room, Papa?" I asked. "Certainly, dear," he said, smiling. I'm very glad you think to like it so. It must be prettier even than I thought it is, if it is." The young lady did not acknowledge this pretty speech, did not seem to hear it. She was leaning back in her seat, her fine eyes under their long lashes gazing on me in contemplation, and she smiled in a kind of rapture. "And now you can read quite plainly the name that is written in the corner. It is not Marcia. It looks as if it was done in gold. The name is Mercala, Countess Karnstein. And this is the little coronet over and underneath, AD 1698. I am descended from the Karnsteins. That is, Mama was. Ah, said the lady languidly. So am I. I think a very long descent, very ancient. Are there any Karnsteins living now? None who bear the name, I believe. The family were ruined in some civil war long ago, but the ruins of the castle are only about 3 miles away. How interesting, she said languidly. But see what beautiful moonlight. She glanced through the hall door, which stood a little open. Suppose you take a little ramble around the court and look down at the road and river. It is so like the night you came to us, I said. She sighed, smiling. She rose, and each with her arm about the other's waist, we walked upon the pavement. In silence, slowly we walked down to the drawbridge where the beautiful landscape opened up before us. And so you were thinking of the night I came here? She almost whispered. Are you glad I came? Delighted, dear Carmilla, I answered. And you asked for the picture you think like me to hang in your room, she murmured with a sigh as she drew her arm closer about my waist and let her pretty head sink upon my shoulder. How romantic you are. How romantic you are, Carmilla, I said. Whenever you tell me your story of it, it will be made up chiefly of some one great romance. She kissed me silently. I am sure, Carmilla, that you have been in love, that there is, at this moment, an affair of the heart going on. I have been in love with no one, and never shall, she whispered, unless it should be with you. How beautiful she looked in the moonlight. Shy and strange was the look with which she hid her face in my neck and hair, with tumultuous sighs that seemed almost to sob, and pressed in mine a hand that trembled. Her soft cheek was glowing up against mine. Darling, darling, she murmured, I live in you, and you would die for me. I love you so. I started from her. She was gazing on with me with eyes from which all fire, all meaning had flown, and with a face colourless and apathetic. Is there still a chill in the air, dear? She said drowsily. I almost shiver. Have I been dreaming? Let us come in. Come in. You look ill, Carmilla, a little faint. You must take some wine, I said. Yes, I will. I'm better now. I shall be quite well in a few minutes. Yes, do give me a little wine, answered Carmilla as we approached the door. Let us look in for a moment. It is the last time, perhaps, I shall see the moonlight with you. I got the voice wrong again. Let us look in for a moment. It is the last time, perhaps, I shall see the moonlight with you. How do you feel now, dear Carmilla? Are you really better? I asked. I was beginning to take alarm, lest she should have been stricken with the strange epidemic that they said invaded the country about us. Papa would be grieved beyond measure, I added, if he thought you were ever so little ill, without immediately letting us know. We have a very skillful doctor near us, the physician who is with Papa today. I'm sure he is. I know how kind you all are, but dear child, I'm quite well again. There is nothing ever wrong with me, but a little weakness. People say I am languid. I am incapable of exertion. I can scarcely walk as far as a child of 3 years old, and every now and then the little strength I have falters, and I become as you have just seen me. But after all, I am very easily set up again. In a moment I am perfectly myself. See how I have recovered. So indeed she had, and she and I talked a great deal, and very animated she was. The remainder of that evening passed without any recurrence of what I called her infatuations. I mean her crazy talks and looks which embarrassed and even frightened me. But there occurred that night an event which gave my thoughts quite a new turn, and seemed to startle even Carmilla's languid nature into momentary energy. The end of chapter 5. Not the end of the book. Boop, boop, boop. Okay. They have used the word languid a lot. That seems to be the main... She EP. She's a very EP woman, is what I'm picking up from this. Chapter 6. A Very Strange Agony. When we got into the drawing room, and had sat down to our coffee and chocolate. Although Carmilla did not take any, she seemed quite herself again, and Madame and Mademoiselle de la Fontaine joined us and made a little card party, in the course of which Papa came in for what he called his dish of tea. When the game was over, he sat down beside Carmilla on the sofa and asked her, a little anxiously, whether she had heard from her mother since her arrival. She answered, no. He then asked whether she knew where a letter would reach her at present. I cannot tell, she answered ambiguously. But I have been thinking of leaving you. You have already been too hospitable and too kind to me, and I have given you an infinity of trouble, and I should wish to take a carriage tomorrow and post in pursuit of her. I know where I shall ultimately find her, although I dare not yet tell you. But you must not dream of any such thing, exclaimed my father to my great relief. We cannot afford to lose you so, and I won't consent to you leaving us, except under the care of your mother, who is so good as to consent to your remaining with us till she should return herself. I should be quite happy if I knew that you had heard from her, but this evening the accounts of the progress of the mysterious disease that has invaded our neighbourhood grow even more alarming, and my beautiful guest, I do feel the responsibility, unaided by the advice from your mother, very much. But I shall do my best, and one thing is certain, that you must not think of leaving us without her distinct direction to that effect. We should suffer too much in parting from you to consent to it easily. Thank you, sir, 1,000 times for your hospitality, she answered, smiling bashfully. You have all been too kind to me. I have seldom been so happy in all my life before as in your beautiful chateau, under your care and in the society of your dear daughter. So he gallantly, in his old-fashioned way, kissed her hand, smiling and pleased at her little speech. I accompanied Carmilla, as usual, to her room, and sat and chatted with her while she was preparing the bed. Do you think, I said at length, that you will ever confide fully in me? She turned round, smiling, but made no answer, only continued to smile on me. You won't answer that, I said. You can't answer pleasantly. I ought not to have asked you. You were quite right to ask me that, or anything. You do not know how dear you are to me, or you could not think of any confidence too great to look for. But I am under vows, no, none half so awfully, and I dare not tell my story yet even to you. The time is very near, when you shall know everything. You will think me cruel, very selfish, but love is always selfish. The more ardent, the more selfish. How jealous I am that you cannot know. You must come with me, loving me to death, or else hate me and still come with me, and hating me through death and after. There is no such word as indifference in my apathetic nature. Now, Carmilla, you are talking to your wild nonsense again, I said hastily. Not I, silly little fool as I am, and full of whims and fancies for your sake, I'll talk like a sage. Were you ever at a ball? No. How you do run on. What is it like? How charming it must be. I almost forget. It is years ago. I laughed. You're not so old. Your first ball can hardly be forgotten yet. I remember everything about it, with an effort. I see it all as divers see what is going on above them, through a medium, dense, rippling, but transparent. There occurred that night what has confused the picture and made its colours faint. I was all but assassinated in my bed, wounded here, she touched her breast, and never was the same since. Were you near dying? Yes, very. A cruel love, strange love, that would have taken my life. Love will have its sacrifices. No sacrifice without blood. Now let us go to sleep. I feel so lazy. How can I get up just now and lock my door? She was lying with her tiny hands buried in her rich wavy hair under her cheek, her little head upon the pillow, and her glittering eyes followed me wherever I moved, with a kind of shy smile that I could not decipher. I bid her good night and crept from the room with an uncomfortable sensation. I often wondered whether our pretty guest ever said her prayers. I certainly had never seen her upon her knees. In the morning she never came down until long after the family prayers were over, and at night she never left the drawing-room to attend our brief evening prayers in the hall. If it had not been that it had casually come out in one of our careless talks that she had been baptized, I should have doubted her being a Christian. Religion was a subject on which I had never heard her speak a word. If I had known the world better, this particular neglect or antipathy would not have been so much a surprise to me. The precautions of nervous people are infectious, and persons of a like temperament are pretty sure, after a time, to intimidate them. I had adopted Carmilla's habit of locking her bedroom door, having taken into my head all of her whimsical alarms about midnight invaders and prowling assassins. I had also adopted her precautions of making a brief search through her room to satisfy herself that no lurking assassin or robber was ensconced. These wise measures taken, I got into my bed and fell asleep. A light was burning in my room. This was an old habit of a very early date, and which nothing could have tempted me to dispense with. Thus fortified, I might take my rest in peace. But dreams come through stone walls, light up dark rooms, or darken lightened ones, and their persons make the exits and entrances as they please and laugh at locksmiths. I had dreams that night that was the very beginning of a strange agony. I cannot call it a nightmare, for I was quite conscious of being asleep. But I was equally conscious of being in my room and lying in bed precisely as I actually was. I saw, or I fancied I saw, the room and its furniture just as I had seen it last, except that it was very dark, and I saw something moving around the foot of the bed, which at first I could not accurately distinguish. But I soon saw that it was a sooty black animal that resembled a monstrous cat. It appeared to me about 4 or 5 feet long, for it measured fully the length of the hearthrug as it passed over it, and continued toing and froing with the lithe, sinister restlessness of a beast in a cage. I could not cry out, though as you may suppose I was terrified. Its pace was growing faster, and the room rapidly darker and darker, and at length so dark that I could no longer see anything of it but its eyes. I felt it spring lightly on the bed, and the 2 broad eyes approached my face, and suddenly I felt a stinging pain, as if 2 large needles darted an inch or 2 apart deep into my breast. I waked with a scream. The room was lighted by the candle that burnt there all through the night, and I saw a female figure standing at the foot of the bed, a little at the right side. It was in a dark loose dress, and its hair was down and covered its shoulders. A block of stone could not have been more still. There was not the slightest stir of respiration. As I stared at it, the figure appeared to have changed its place, and now nearer the door, then to close it. The door opened, and it passed out. I was now relieved and able to breathe and move. My first thought was that Carmilla had been playing me a trick, and that I had forgotten to secure my door. I hastened to it, and found it locked as usual on the inside. I was afraid to open it. I was horrified. I sprang into my bed and covered up my head in the bedclothes, and lay there more dead than alive until morning. End of chapter 6. Bum 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 bum. It's good the door. The door came in handy. Okay. Chapter 7. Descending. It would be vain my attempting to tell you the horror with which even now I recall the occurrence of that night. It was no such transitory terror as a dream leaves behind. It seemed to deepen by time, and communicated itself to the room and the very furniture that encompassed the apparition. I could not bear next day to be alone for a moment. I should have told Papa, but for 2 opposite reasons. At one time I thought he would laugh at my story, and I could not bear its being treated as a jest. And at another I thought he might fancy that I had been attacked by the mysterious complaint which had invaded our neighbourhood. I had myself no misgiving of any kind, and he had been rather an invalid for some time. I was afraid of alarming him. I was comfortable enough with my good-natured companions, Madame Perrodon and the vivacious Mademoiselle de la Fontaine. They had both perceived that I was out of spirits and nervous, and at length I told them what lay so heavy at my heart. Mademoiselle laughed, but I fancied that Madame Perrodon looked anxious. By the by, said Mademoiselle, laughing, the long lime tree walk behind Camilla's bedroom window, it's haunted. Nonsense, said Madame, who probably thought this theme rather inopportune. And who tells the story, my dear? Martin says that he came up twice when the old yard gate was being repaired before sunrise, and twice saw the same female figure down the lime tree avenue. So well he might, as long as there are cows to milk in the river fields, said Madame. I dare say, but Martin chooses to be frightened, and never did I see fool more frightened. You must not say a word about it to Carmilla, because she can see that down that walk from her window, I interposed, and she is, if possible, a greater coward than I. Carmilla came down rather later than usual that day. I was so frightened last night, she said, as soon as we were together, and I am so sure I should have seen something dreadful if it had not been for that charm I brought from the poor little hunchback, whom I called such hard names. I had a dream of something black coming round my bed, and I awoke in perfect horror, and I really thought for some seconds I saw a dark figure near the chimney-piece. But I felt under my bed for my charm, and the moment my fingers touched it, the figure disappeared, and I felt quite certain, only that it had by me, that something frightful would have made its appearance, and perhaps throttled me, as it did those poor people we heard of. Well, listen to me, I began, and recounted my adventure, at the recital of which she appeared horrified. And had you the charm near you? She asked earnestly. No. I dropped it into the china vase in the drawing-room, but I shall certainly take it with me tonight, as you have so much faith in it. At this distance of time, I cannot tell you or even understand how I overcame my terror so effectually as to lie alone in my room that night. I remember distinctly that I pinned the charm to my pillow. I fell asleep almost immediately and slept even more soundly than usual all night. Next night, I passed as well. My sleep was delightfully deep and dreamless, but I wakened with a sense of lassitude and melancholy, which, however, did not exceed a degree that was almost luxurious. Well, I told you so, said Carmilla when I described my quiet sleep. I had such a delightful sleep myself last night. I pinned the charm to my breast of my nightdress. It was too far away the night before, and I'm quite sure it was all fancy, except the dreams I used to think that evil spirits made dreams, but our doctor told me it is no such thing. Only a fever passing by, or some other malady. They so often do, he said, knock at doors, and not being able to get in, passes on with that alarm. What do you think the charm is? Said I. It has been fumigated or immersed in some drug, and it is an antidote against the malaria, she answered. Then it acts only on the body? Certainly. You don't suppose that evil spirits are frightened by bits of ribbon or the perfumes of a druggist's shop? No. These complaints wander in the air, begin by trying the nerves, and so infect the brain. But before they can seize upon you, the antidote repels them. That, I am sure, is what the charm has done for us. It is nothing magical. It is simply natural. I should have been happier if I could have quite agreed with Carmilla, but I did my best, and the impression was still losing its force a little. For some nights I slept profoundly, but still every morning I felt the same lassitude, and languor weighed down upon me all day. I felt myself a changed girl. A strange melancholy was stealing over me, a melancholy that I would not have interrupted. Dim thoughts of death began to open, and an idea that I was slowly sinking took gentle and somehow not unwelcome possession of me. It was sad. The tone of mind which this induced was also sweet. Whatever it might be, my soul acquiesced in it. I would not admit that I was ill. I would not consent to tell my papa, or to have the doctor sent for. Carmilla became more devoted to me than ever, and her strange paroxysms of languid adoration more frequent. She used to gloat on me with increasing ardour the more my strength and spirits waned. This always shocked me like a momentary glare of insanity. Without knowing it, I was already in a pretty advanced stage of the strange illness under which mortal had ever suffered. There was an unaccountable fascination in its earlier symptoms that more than reconciled me to that incapacitating effect of that strange sort of malady. This fascination increased for a time until it reached a certain point, when gradually a sense of the horrible mingled itself within, deepening as you shall hear, until it discolored and perverted the whole state of my life. The first change I experienced was rather agreeable. It was very near the turning point from which I began the descent of Avernus. Certain vague and strange sensations visited me in my sleep. The prevailing one was of that pleasant, peculiar, cold thrill which we feel in bathing, when we move against the current of a river. This was soon accompanied by dreams that seemed interminable, and were so vague that I could never recollect their scenery or persons, or any one connected portion of their action. But they left an awful impression, and with a sense of exhaustion, as if I had passed through a long period of great mental exertion and danger. After all these dreams, there remained a waking a remembrance of having been in a place very nearly dark, and of having spoken with people who I could not see, and especially one of a clear voice, of a female's very deep, that spoke as if at a distance, slowly, and producing always the same sensation of indescribable solemnity and fear. Sometimes there came a sensation as if a hand was drawn softly across my cheek and neck. Sometimes it was as if warm lips kissed me, and longer and more lovingly as they reached my throat, but there was a caress fixed itself. My heart beat faster, and my breathing rose and fell rapidly, and full drawn a sobbing that rose into a sense of strangulation, supervened and turned into a dreadful convulsion in which my senses left me and I became unconscious. It was now 3 weeks since the commencement of this unaccountable state. My suffering had during the last week told upon my appearance. I had grown pale, my arms were dilated and darkened underneath, and the languor with which I had long felt began to display itself on my countenance. My father asked me often whether I was ill, but with an obstinacy which now seems to me unaccountable, I persisted in assuring him that I was quite well. In a sense, this was true. I had no pain. I could not complain of bodily derangement. My complaint seemed to be one of the imagination or the nerves, and the horrible as my sufferings were, I kept them, with a morbid reserve, very nearly to myself. It could not be a terrible complaint which the peasants called the au pair, for I had now been suffering for 3 weeks, and they were seldom ill for much more than 3 days, when death put an end to their miseries. Carmilla complained of dreams and feverish sensations, but by no means of so alarming a kind as mine. I say that mine were extremely alarming. Had I been capable of comprehending my condition, I would have invoked aid and advice on my knees. The narcotic of an unsuspected influence was acting upon me, and my perceptions were benumbed. I am going to tell you now of a dream that led immediately to an odd discovery. One night, instead of the voice I was accustomed to hear in the dark, I heard one sweet and tender, and at the same time terrible, which said, "Your mother warns you to beware of the assassin." At the same time, a light unexpectedly sprang up, and I saw Carmilla standing near the foot of my bed in her white nightdress, bathed from her chin to her feet in one great stain of blood. I wakened with a shriek, possessed with one of the ideas that Carmilla was being murdered. I remembered springing from my bed, and the next recollection is that of standing on the lobby crying for help. Madame and Mademoiselle came scurrying out of their rooms in alarm. A lamp burned always on the lobby, and seeing me they soon learned the cause of my terror. I insisted on our knocking at Carmilla's door. Our knocking was unanswered. It soon became a pounding and an uproar. We shrieked her name, but it was all in vain. We all grew frightened, for the door was locked. We hurried back in panic to my room, where we rang the bell long and furiously. If my father's room had been at that side of the house, we would have called him up at once to our aid, but alas, he was quite out of our hearing, and to reach him involved an excursion for which none of us had the courage. Servants, however, soon came running up the stairs. I had got my dressing gown and slippers meanwhile, and my companions were already similarly furnished. Recognizing the voices of the servants on the lobby, we sailed out together, and having renewed as fruitlessly our summons at Carmilla's door, I ordered the men to force the lock. They did so, and we stood holding our lights aloft in the doorway, and so stared into the room. We called her by name, but there was still no reply. We looked around the room. Everything was undisturbed. It was exactly in the state in which I had left it on bidding her good night, but Carmilla was gone. End of chapter. Anonymous, thank you very much for the £50. That is very kind of you. Thank you. Thank you kindly. Spoopy. Where did Carmilla go? Who knows? Bum bum. Okay. Next chapter. Chapter V1118. She just went on a little walk, a little fly. Just went for a little fly. Okay. Chapter 8. The Search. At sight of the room perfectly undisturbed except for our violent entrance, we began to cool a little, and soon recovered our senses sufficiently to dismiss the men. It had struck Mademoiselle that possibly Carmilla had just been awakened by the uproar at her door, and in her first panic had jumped from her bed and hid herself in a press or behind the curtains, from which she could not of course emerge until the major domo and his myrmidons had withdrawn. We now recommenced our search and began to call her name again. It was all to no purpose. Our perplexity and agitation increased. We examined the windows, but they were secured. I implored of Carmilla, if she had concealed herself, to play this cruel trick no longer, to come out and end our anxieties. It was all useless. I was by this time convinced that she was not in the room, nor in the dressing room, the door of which was still locked on this side. She could not have passed it. I was utterly puzzled. Had Carmilla discovered one of those secret passages which the old housekeeper said were known to exist in the Schloss, although the tradition of their exact situation had been lost? A little time would no doubt explain all. Utterly perplexed, as for the present we were. It was past 4 o'clock, and Wait, I've got a thing for this. It was past 4 o'clock, and I preferred passing the remaining hours of darkness in Madame's room. Daylight brought no solution of the difficulty. The whole household, with my father at its head, was in a state of agitation next morning. Every part of the chateau was searched. The grounds were explored. No trace of the missing lady could be discovered. The stream was about to be dragged. My father was in distraction, with a tale to have to tell the poor girl's mother on her return. I, too, was almost beside myself, though my grief was quite of a different kind. The morning was passed in alarm and excitement. It was now 1 o'clock. 1 o'clock. Stop doing 2 o'clock. There we go. It was now 1 o'clock. And still no tidings. I ran up to Carmilla's room and found her standing at her dressing table. I was astounded. I could not believe my eyes. She beckoned me to her, and with her pretty fingers, in silence. Her face expressed extreme fear. I ran to her in an ecstasy of joy. I kissed and embraced her again and again. I ran to the bell and rang it vehemently to bring others to the spot who might at once relieve my father's anxiety. "Dear Carmilla, what has become of you all this time? We have been in agonies of anxiety about you," I exclaimed. "Where have you been? How did you come back?" "Last night had been a night of wonders," she said. "For mercy's sake, explain all you can." "It was past 2 last night," she said, "when I went to sleep as usual in my bed, with the doors locked, that of the dressing room and that opening upon the gallery. My sleep was uninterrupted, and so, as far as I know, dreamless. But I woke just now on the sofa in the dressing room here, and I found the door between the rooms open, and the other doors forced. How could all this have happened without my being wakened? It must have been accompanied with a great deal of noise, and I am particularly easily wakened. And how could I have been carried out of my bed without my sleep of being interrupted? I, whom the slightest stir startles." By this time, Madame, Mademoiselle, my father, and a number of the servants were in the room. Carmilla was, of course, overwhelmed with inquiries, congratulations, and welcome. But she had but one story to tell, and seemed the least able of all the party to suggest any way of accounting for what had happened. My father took a turn up and down the room, thinking. I saw Carmilla's eyes following him for a moment with a sly, dark glance. When my father had sent the servants away, Mademoiselle, having gone in search of a little bottle of Valerian and Salvatil. And there being no one now in the room with Carmilla except for my father, Madame, and myself, he came to her thoughtfully, took her hand very kindly, led her to the sofa, and sat her down. "Will you forgive me, my dear, if I risk a conjecture and ask a question?" "Who could have a better right?" she asked. "Ask what you please, and I will tell you everything. But my story is a simple one of bewilderment and darkness. I know absolutely nothing. Put any question you please, but you know, of course, the limitation Mamma has placed me under." "Perfectly, my dear child. I need not approach the topic on which she desires our silence. Now, the marvel of last night consists in your having been removed from your bed in your room without being wakened, and this removal having occurred apparently while the windows were still secured, and the 2 doors locked from the inside. I will tell you my theory, and ask you a question." Carmilla was leaning on her hand dejectedly. Madame and I were listening breathlessly. "Now, my question is this. Have you ever been suspected of walking in your sleep?" "Never. Since I was very young indeed." "But you did walk in your sleep when you were very young?" "Yes, I know I did. I have been told so often by my old nurse." My father smiled and nodded. "Well, what has happened is this. You got up in your sleep, unlocked the door, not leaving the key as usual in the lock, but taking it out and locking it on the outside. You took again the key and carried it out away with you to some one of the 25 rooms on this floor, or perhaps upstairs or downstairs. There are so many rooms and closets and so much heavy furniture and such accumulations of lumber that it would require a week to search this house thoroughly. Do you see now what I mean?" "I do, but not at all," she answered. "And how, Papa, do you account for her finding herself on the sofa in the dressing room, which we had all searched so carefully?" "She came there after you searched it, still in her sleep, and at last woke spontaneously, as was much too surprised to find herself where she was as anyone else. I wish all mysteries were this easily and innocently explained as yours, Carmilla," he said, laughing. "And now we may congratulate ourselves on the certainty that the most natural explanation of the occurrence is one that involves no drugging, no tampering with locks, no burglars, no poisoners or witches. Nothing that need alarm Carmilla or anyone else for our safety." Carmilla was looking charmingly. Nothing could be more beautiful than her tints. Her beauty was, I think, enhanced by that graceful languor that was peculiar to her. I think my father was silently contrasting her looks with mine, for he said, "I wish my poor Laura was looking more like herself," he sighed. So our alarms were happily ended, and Carmilla restored to her friends. End of the chapter. So we've got, how many pages in are we? We're 65 pages in, and we've just learnt the main character's name is Laura. Night Sean, thank you very much for the raid. And Delta, thank you very much for the £25. Thank you. It's very kind of you. Boop boo. Boo-doo-doo-doo. Do-do-do-do. The guy, yeah, her father is an interesting one. He's just like, "Oh no, it's just women being women. What are they like? You just walked around a bit. Don't worry, darling." Okay. Perfectly logical. Just ignore all the facts and it's fine. Okay, right. Chapter 9. The Doctor. As Carmilla would not hear of an attendant sleeping in her room, my father arranged that a servant should sleep outside her door, so that she would not attempt to make another excursion without being arrested at her own door. That night passed quietly. The next morning early, the doctor, whom my father had sent for without telling me a word about it, arrived to see me. Madame accompanied me to the library, and there was the grave little doctor with white hair and spectacles, whom I mentioned before, was waiting to receive me. I told him my story, and as I proceeded, he grew graver and graver. We were standing, he and I, in the recess of one of the windows, facing one another. When my statement was over, he leaned with his shoulder against the wall, and with his eyes fixed on me earnestly, with an interest in which was a dash of horror. After a minute's reflection, he asked Madame if he could see my father. He was sent for accordingly, and he entered smiling. He said, "I dare say, Doctor, you're going to tell me that I'm an old fool for having brought you here. I hope I am." But his smile faded into shadow as the doctor, with a very grave face, beckoned him to him. He and the doctor talked for some time in the same recess where I had just conferred with the physician. It seemed an earnest and argumentative conversation. The room is very large, and I and Madame stood together, burning with curiosity at the farther end. Not a word could we hear, however, for they spoke in a very low tone, and the deep recess of the window quite concealed the doctor from view, and very nearly my father, whose foot, arm, and shoulder only we could see. The voices were, I suppose, all the less audible for the sort of closet which the thick wall and window formed. After a time, my father's face looked into the room. It was pale, thoughtful, and, I fancied, agitated. "Laura, dear, come here for a moment. Madame, we shan't trouble you. The doctor says, at present." Accordingly, I approached for the first time, a little alarmed. For although I felt very weak, I did not feel ill, and strength, one always fancies, is a thing that may be picked up when we please. My father held out his hand to me as I drew near, but he was looking at the doctor, and he said, "It certainly is very odd. I don't quite understand it. Laura, come here, dear. Now attend to Dr. Spielsberg and recollect yourself. You mentioned a sensation, that of 2 needles piercing the skin, somewhere about your neck, on the night when you experienced your first horrible dream. Is there any soreness?" "None at all," I answered. "Can you indicate with your finger about the point at which you think this occurred?" Very little below my throat. Here," I answered. I wore a morning dress which covered the place I pointed to. "Now, you can satisfy yourself," said the doctor. "You won't mind your papa's lowering your dress a little? It is necessary to detect a symptom of the complaint under which you have been suffering." I acquiesced. It was only an inch or 2 below the edge of my collar. "God bless me! So it is!" exclaimed my father, growing pale. "You see it now with your own eyes," said the doctor, with a gloomy triumph. "What is it?" I exclaimed, beginning to be frightened. "Nothing, my dear young lady, but a small blue spot about the size of the tip of your little finger. And now," he continued, turning to Papa, "the question is what is best to be done." "Is there any danger?" I urged, in great trepidation. "I trust not, my dear," answered the doctor. "I don't see why you should not recover. I don't see why you should not begin immediately to get better. That is the point at which the sense of strangulation begins." "Yes," I answered. "And recollect as well you can, he's—" I think that's meant to say the same point was a kind of centre of that thrill which you described just now, like the current of a cold stream running against you." "It may have been. I think it was." "Ah, you see," he said, turning to my father. "Shall I say a word to Madame?" "Certainly," said my father. He called Madame to him and said, "I find my young friend here far from well. It won't be of any great consequence, I hope, but it will be necessary that some steps be taken, which I will explain by and by. But in the meantime, Madame, will you be so good as to not let Miss Laura be alone for a moment? That is the only direction I need give you for now. It is indispensable." "We may rely upon your kindness, Madame, I know," added my father. Madame satisfied him eagerly. "And you, dear Laura, I know you will observe the doctor's direction." I shall have to ask you a question upon another... I shall have to ask your opinion upon another patient, whose symptoms slightly resemble those of my daughter, that have just been detailed to you. Very much milder in degree, but I believe quite of the same sort. She is a young lady, our guest, but as you say, will be passing this way again this evening. You can't do better than to take your supper here, and you can then see her. She does not come down now until the afternoon." "I thank you," said the doctor. "I shall be with you then at about 7 this evening." And then they repeated their directions to me and to Madame. And with the parting charge, my father left us and walked out with the doctor, and I saw them pacing together up and down between the road and the moat on the grassy platform in front of the castle, evidently absorbed in earnest conversation. The doctor did not return. I saw him mount his horse there and then take his leave and ride away eastward through the forest. Nearly at the same time, I saw the man arrive from Dranfield with the letters and dismount and hand the bag to my father. In the meantime, Madame and I were both busy, lost in conjecture as to the reason of the singular and earnest direction which the doctor and my father had concurred in imposing. Madame, as she afterwards told me, was afraid the doctor apprehended a sudden seizure, and that without prompt assistance I might either lose my life in a fit or be seriously hurt. The intrepidation did not strike me, and I fancied, perhaps luckily for my nerves, that the arrangement was prescribed simply to secure a companion, who would prevent my taking too much exercise or eating unripe fruit, or doing any of the 50 foolish things to which young people are supposed to be prone. About half an hour after my father came in, he had a letter in his hand, and said, "This letter has been delayed. It is from General Spielsdorf. He might have been here yesterday. He may not come till tomorrow, or he may be here today." He put the letter into my hand, but he did not look pleased, as he used when a guest, especially one much beloved as the General was coming. On the contrary, he looked as if he wished him at the bottom of the Red Sea. There was plainly something on his mind which he did not choose to divulge. "Papa, darling, will you tell me this?" I said, suddenly laying my hand on his arm and looking, I am sure, imploringly in his face. "Perhaps," he answered, smoothing my hair caressingly over my eyes. Does the doctor think me very ill?" "No, dear. He thinks if the right steps are taken, you will be quite well again. At least on the high road to a complete recovery in a day or two." He answered a little dryly, "I wish our good friend the General had chosen any other time, that is. I wish you had been perfectly well to receive him." "But do tell me, Papa," I insisted. "What does he think is the matter with me?" Nothing, you must not plague me with questions," he answered with a little more irritation than I ever remember him having displayed before, and seeing that I looked wounded, I suppose he kissed me and added, "You shall know all about it in a day or two. That is all I know. In the meantime, you are not to trouble your head about it." He turned and left the room, but came back before I had done wondering and puzzling over the oddity of all this. It was merely to say that he was going to Kernstein, and had ordered the carriage to be ready at 12, and that I and Madame should accompany him. He was going to see the priest who lived near those picturesque grounds, upon business, and as Carmilla had never seen them, she should follow, when she came down with Mademoiselle, who would bring materials for what you call a picnic, which might be laid for us in the ruined castle. At 12 o'clock accordingly, I was ready, and not long after my father, Madame and I set out upon our projected drive. Passing the drawbridge, we turned to the right and followed the road over the steep Gothic bridge westward to reach the deserted village and ruined castle of Kernstein. No sylvan driver can be fancied prettier. The ground breaks into gentle hills and hollows, all clothed with beautiful woods, totally destitute of the comparative formality which artificial planting and early culture and pruning impart. The irregularities of the ground often lead the road out of its course and cause it to wind beautifully around the sides of the broken hollows and the steeper sides of the hills among varieties of ground almost inexhaustible. Turning one of these points, we suddenly encountered our old friend, the General, riding towards us, attended by his mounted servants. His portmanteaus were following in a hired wagon, such as we term a cart. The General dismounted as we pulled up, and after the usual greetings, was easily persuaded to accept the vacant seat in the carriage and send his horse on with his servants to the Schloss. End of chapter 9. End of chapter 9. Chapter 9. Hello, Phil. How's it going? Howdy do. Okay. So, I am going to go for a little wee and top up my drink, and then we shall continue to chapter 10. Bum, bum, bum. Hansan's in charge. BRB. got my glass. Hello. Okay. Whoopa. Chapter 10. It's called Bereaved. It was about 10 months since we had last seen him, but that time had sufficed to make alterations of years in his appearance. He had grown thinner. Something of gloom and anxiety had taken the place of that cordial serenity which used to characterize his features. His dark blue eyes, always penetrating, now gleamed with a sterner light from under his shaggy grey eyebrows. It was not such a change as grief alone usually induces, and angrier passions seemed to have had their share in bringing it about. We had not long resumed our drive when the General began to talk, and with his usual soldierly directness of the bereavement, as he termed it, which he had sustained in the death of his beloved niece and ward, and then broke out in a tone of intense bitterness and fury, inveighing against us the hellish acts to which he had fallen a victim, and expressing with more exasperation than piety his wonder that heaven should tolerate so monstrous an indulgence of the lusts and malignity of hell. My father, who saw at once that something very extraordinary had befallen him, asked him, if it is not too painful, to detail the circumstances which he thought justified the strong terms in which he expressed himself. "I should tell you with all pleasure," said the General, "but you would not believe me." "Why should I not?" he asked. "Because," he said testily, "you believe in nothing but what consists with your own prejudices and illusions. I remember when I was like you, but I have learned better." "Try me," said my father. "I am not such a dogmatist as you suppose. Besides which, I know very well that you generally require proof for what you believe, and am therefore very strongly predisposed to respect your conclusions. You are right in supposing that I have not been led lightly into a belief in the marvellous, for what I have experienced is marvellous, and I have been forced by extraordinary evidence to credit that which ran counter, diametrically, to all my theories. I have been made the dupe of a preternatural conspiracy." Notwithstanding his professions of confidence in the General's penetration, I saw my father at this point glance at the General with, as I thought, a marked suspicion of his sanity. The General did not see it, luckily. He was looking gloomily and curiously into the glades and vistas of the woods that were opening before us. "You are going to the ruins of Cairnstein?" he said. "Yes, it is a lucky coincidence. Do you know, I was going to ask you to bring me here to inspect them. I have a special object in exploring. There is a ruined chapel, ain't there, and a great many tombs of that extinct family." "So there are. Highly interesting," said my father. "I hope you are thinking of claiming the title and estates?" My father said this gaily, but the General did not recollect the laugh or even the smile which courtesy exacts for a friend's joke. On the contrary, he looked grave and even fierce, ruminating on the matter that stirred his anger and the horror. "Something very different," he said gruffly. "I mean to unearth some of those fine people. I hope by God's blessing to accomplish a pious sacrilege here, which will relieve our earth of certain monsters and enable honest people to sleep in their beds without being assailed by murderers. I have strange things to tell you, my dear friend, such as I myself would have scouted as incredible a few months before." My father looked at him again, but this time not with a glance of suspicion, with an eye, rather, of keen intelligence and alarm. "The house of Cairnstein," he said, "has long been extinct, 100 years at least. My dear wife was maternal descended from the Cairnsteins, but name and title have long since ceased to exist. The castle is a ruin, and the very village is deserted. It is 50 years since the smoke of the chimney was seen there. Not a roof left." "Quite true. I have heard a great deal about that since I last saw you, a great deal that will astonish you. But I had better relate everything in the order in which it occurred, said the general. You saw my dear ward, my child, I may call her. No creature could have ever been more beautiful, and only 3 months ago none more blooming. Yes, poor thing, when I saw her, she certainly was quite lovely, said my father. I was grieved and shocked, more than I can tell you, my dear friend. I knew what a blow it was to you. He took the general's hand, and they exchanged a kind pressure. Tears gathered in the old soldier's eye. He did not seek to conceal them. He said, We have been very old friends. I knew you would feel for me, childless as I am. She had become an object of very near interest to me, and I repaid my care by an affection that cheered my home and made life happy. That is all gone. The years that remain to me on earth may not be very long, but by God's mercy I hope to accomplish a service to mankind before I die, and to subserve the vengeance of heaven upon the fiends who have murdered my poor child in the spring of her hopes and beauty. You said just now that you intended relating everything as it occurred, said my father. Pray do. I assure you that it is not mere curiosity that prompts me. By this time we had reached the point at which the Junstall road, by which the general had come, diverges from the road with which we were travelling to Kernstein. How far is it to the ruins? Inquired the general, looking anxiously forward. About 1/2 league, answered my father. Pray, let us hear the story you were so good as to promise. Chapter 11. The Story. With all my heart, said the general with an effort, and after a short pause in which to arrange his subject, he commenced one of the strangest narratives I have ever heard. My dear child was looking forward with great pleasure to the visit you had been so good as to arrange for her, to your charming daughter. Here he made me a gallant but melancholy bow. In the meantime, we had an invitation to my old friend, Count Carsfield, whose schloss is about 6 leagues to the other side of Karnstein. I was to attend the series of fêtes which, you remember, were given to him in honour of his illustrious visitor, the Grand Duke Charles. Yes, very splendid, I believe they were, said my father. Princely. But then his hospitalities are quite regal. He has Aladdin's lamp. The night from which my sorrows dates was devoted to a magnificent masquerade. The crowds were thrown open, the trees hung with coloured lamps. There was such a display of fireworks as Paris itself has never witnessed, and with such music, you know, is my weakness, such ravishing music, the finest instrumental band in perhaps the world, and the finest singers who could be collected from all the great operas in Europe. As you wandered through these fantastically illuminated grounds, the moonlight chateau throw a rosy light from its long windows, and you would suddenly hear these ravishing voices stealing from the silence of some grove or rising from boats upon the lake. I felt myself, as I looked and listened, carried back into the romance and poetry of my earlier youth. When the fireworks were ended and the ball began, we returned to the noble suite of rooms that were thrown open to dancers. A masked ball, you know, is a beautiful sight, but so brilliant a spectacle is of the kind I never saw before. It was a very aristocratic assembly. I was myself almost the only nobody present. My dear child was looking quite beautiful. She wore no mask. Her excitement and delight added an unspeakable charm to her features. Always lovely, I remarked, a young lady, dressed magnificently but wearing a mask, who appeared to me to be observing my ward with an extraordinary interest. I had seen her earlier in the evening in the great hall, and again for a few minutes, walking near us on the terrace under the castle windows, similarly employed. A lady, also masked, richly and gravely dressed, with a stately air like a person of rank, accompanied her as a chaperone. Had the young lady not worn a mask, I could, of course, have been much more certain upon the question whether she was really watching my poor darling. I am now well assured that she was. We were now in one of the salons. My poor dear child had been dancing and was resting a little in one of the chairs near the door. I was standing there. The 2 ladies I have mentioned had approached, and the younger took the chair next to my ward, while her companion stood beside me, and for a little time addressed herself in a low tone to her charge. Availing herself on the privilege of her mask, she turned to me, and in the tone of an old friend, and calling me by my name, opened a conversation with me, which piqued my curiosity a good deal. She referred to many scenes where she had met me, at court and at distinguished houses. She alluded a little to incidents which I had long ceased to think of, but which I found had only laid an abeyance in my memory, for they instantly started into life at her touch. I became more and more curious to ascertain who she was every moment. She parried my attempts to discover very adroitly and pleasantly. The knowledge she showed of many passages in my life seemed to me all but unaccountable, and she appeared to take a not unnatural pleasure in foiling my curiosity, and in seeing me floundering my eager perplexity from one conjecture to another. In the meantime, the young lady whom her mother called by the odd name of Millarca, when she once or twice addressed her, had with the same ease and grace got into conversation with my ward. She introduced herself by saying that her mother was a very old acquaintance of mine. She spoke of the agreeable audacity which her mask rendered practicable, and she talked like a friend. She admired her dress and insinuated very prettily her admiration of her beauty. She amused her with laughing, criticisms upon people who crowded the ballroom, and laughed at my poor child's fun. She was very witty and lively when she pleased, and after a time they had grown good friends, and the young stranger lowered her mask, displaying a remarkably beautiful face. I had never seen it before, neither had my child, but though it was new to us, the features were so engaging as well as lovely that it was impossible not to feel the attraction powerfully. My poor girl did so. I never saw anyone more taken with another at first sight, unless indeed it was to the stranger herself, who seemed quite to have lost her heart to her. In the meantime, availing myself of the license of the masquerade, I put not a few questions to the elderly lady. You have puzzled me utterly, I said, laughing. Is that not enough? Won't you now consent to stand on equal terms and do me the kindness to remove your mask? Can you... Oh, this is the elderly lady. Can you request be more unreasonable? She replied. Ask a lady to yield an advantage. Besides, how do you know you should recognize me? Years make change. As you see, I said with a bow, and I suppose rather melancholy little laugh. As philosophers tell us, she said, and how do you know that the sight of my face would help you? I should take a chance for that, I answered. It is vain trying to make yourself out an old woman. Your figure betrays you. Years, nevertheless, have passed since I saw you, rather since you saw me, for that is what I am considering. Millarca there is my daughter. I cannot be young, even in the opinion of people whom time has taught to be indulgent, and I may not like to be compared with what you remember me. You have no mask to remove. You can offer me nothing in exchange. My petition to you is to your pity, to remove it, and mine to yours to let it stay where it is, she replied. And then, at least, you will tell me whether you are French or German. You speak both languages so perfectly. I don't think I shall tell you that, General. You intend to surprise and are meditating the particular point of attack. At all events, you won't deny this, I said, that being honoured by your permission to converse, I ought to know how to address you. Shall I say, Madame la Comtesse? She laughed, and would no doubt have led me with another evasion, if indeed I can treat an occurrence in an interview, every circumstance of which was prearranged, as I now believe with the profoundest cunning, as liable to be modified by accident. As to that, she began, but she was interrupted, almost as she opened her lips, by a gentleman dressed in black who looked particularly elegant and distinguished, with this drawback, that his face had most deadly pale I had ever seen, except in death. He was in no masquerade, in the plain evening dress of a gentleman, and he said without a smile, but with a courtly and unusually low bow, Will Madame la Comtesse permit me to say a few words which may interest her? The lady turned quickly to him and touched her lip in token of silence, and then she said to me, Keep my place, General. I shall return when I have said a few words. And with this injunction playfully given, she walked a little aside with the gentleman in black, and talked for some minutes, apparently very earnestly. Then they walked away slowly together in the crowd, and I lost them for some minutes. I spent the interval in cudgelling my brains for a conjecture as the identity of the lady who seemed to remember me so kindly, and I was thinking of turning about and joining in the conversation between my pretty ward and the Countess's daughter, and trying whether, by the time she returned, I might not have a surprise in store for her, by having her name, title, chateau, and estates at my fingers' ends. But at this moment she returned, accompanied by the pale man in black, who said, "I shall return, and inform Madame la Comtesse when her carriage is at the door." He withdrew with a bow. End of chapter 12. No, wait, 11. Ta-da! Hello, Chris. Are you causing trouble? What are you saying? Is this smut? It's not smut. Well, maybe for its time it was smut. But it's not smut now. 1872, I think this was considered quite risque. But not so much now. Not so much. Okay. Here we go. So, I can't tell. What you might not have picked up on there is that the name that they gave for the daughter, which was Mercala or something, is basically the same letters as Carmilla, as was the portrait. Yours? £50? Oh my gosh, thank you very much. That's very kind of you. We're going to get a hint of the ankle. Well, there's been kisses on the cheeks and heaving bosoms. So it's sort of getting there. But yeah, the two names that have been given in the portrait and of the young lady are both anagrams of Carmilla, which I should have mentioned before, but they're not. But yes, thank you, Chris. Thank you very much. Right. Chapter 12. A petition. Then we are to lose Madame la Comtesse, but I hope only for a few hours, I said with a low bow. It may be that, or it may be a few weeks. It was very unlucky his speaking to me as he now did. Do you know me? Oh wait, that was the old lady. It may be that, or it may be for a few weeks. It was very unlucky his speaking to me just now. Do you now know me? I assured her I did not. You shall know me, she said, but not at present. We are older and better friends than perhaps you suspect. I cannot yet declare myself. I shall in 3 weeks pass your beautiful Schloss, about which I have been making inquiries. I shall then look in upon you for an hour or two and renew a friendship which I never think of without 1,000 pleasant recollections. This moment a piece of news has reached me like a thunderbolt. I must set out now and travel by a devious route, nearly 100 miles, with all the dispatch I can possibly make. My perplexities multiply, and I am only deterred by the compulsory reserve I practice as to my poor name from making a very singular request of you. My poor child has not quite recovered her strength. Her horse fell with her at a hunt which she has ridden out to witness. Her nerves have not yet recovered from the shock, and our physician says that she must on no account exert herself from time to come. We came here in consequence, by very easy stages, hardly 6 leagues a day. I must now travel day and night on a mission of life and death, a mission the critical and momentous nature of which I shall be able to explain to you when we meet, as I hope we shall in a few weeks without the necessity of any concealment. She went on to make her petition, and it was in the tone of a person from whom such a request amounted to conferring rather than seeking a favour. This was only in manner, as it seemed quite unconscious. That's the term in which was expressed nothing could be more depreciatory. It was simply that I would consent to take charge of her daughter during her absence. This was, all things considered, a strange, not to say an audacious request. She, in some sort, disarmed me by stating and admitting everything that could be urged against it, and throwing herself entirely upon my chivalry. At the same moment, by a fatality that seemed to have predetermined all that happened, my poor child came to my side and, in an undertone, besought me to invite her new friend, Milaka, to pay us a visit. She had just been sounding her, and thought if her mamma would allow her, she would like it extremely. At another time, I should have told her to wait a little until at least we knew who they were, but I had not a moment to think in. The two ladies assailed me, and I must confess the refined and beautiful face of the young lady, about which there was something extremely engaging, as well as the elegance and fire of high birth, determined me and quite overpowered. I submitted and undertook too easily the care of the young lady whom her mother called Malaka. The Countess beckoned to her daughter, who listened with grave attention while she told her in general terms how suddenly and peremptory she had been summoned, and also of the arrangement she had made for her under my care, adding that I was one of her earliest and most valued friends. I made, of course, such speeches as the case seemed to call for, and found myself, on reflection, in a position which I did not half like. The gentleman in black returned and ceremoniously conducted the lady from the room. The demeanour of this gentleman was as such to impress me with the conviction that the Countess was a lady of very much more importance than her modest title alone might have led me to assume. Her last charge to me was that no attempt was to be made to learn more about her than I might have already guessed, until her return. Her distinguished host, whose guest she was, knew her reasons. "But here," she said, "neither I nor my daughter could safely remain for more than a day. I removed my mask imprudently for a moment about an hour ago, and too late I fancied you saw me. So I resolved to seek an opportunity of talking to you. Had I found that you had seen me, I would have thrown myself on your high senses of honour and keep my secret some weeks. As it is, I am satisfied that you did not see me. But if you now suspect, or on reflection should suspect who I am, I commit myself in a like manner entirely to your honour. My daughter will observe the same secrecy, and I well know that you will from time to time remind her, lest she should thoughtlessly disclose it." She whispered a few words to her daughter, kissed her hurriedly twice, and went away, accompanied by the pale gentleman in black, and disappeared into the crowd. "In the next room," said Malaka, "there is a window that looks upon the hall door. I should like to see the last of Mamma, and to kiss my hand to her." We assented, of course, and accompanied her to the window. We looked out and saw a handsome old-fashioned carriage with a troop of couriers and men. We saw the slim figure of the pale gentleman in black as he held a thick velvet cloak and placed it about her shoulders and threw the hood over her head. She nodded to him and just touched his hand with hers. He bowed low repeatedly as the door closed and the carriage began to move. "She is gone," said Malaka with a sigh. "She is gone," I repeated to myself for the first time in the hurried moments that had elapsed since my consent, reflecting upon the folly of my act. "She did not look up," said the young lady plaintively. "The Countess had taken off her mask. Perhaps she did not care to show her face," I said, "and she could not know that you were in the window." She sighed and looked in my face. She was so beautiful that I relented. I was sorry that I had for a moment repented of my hospitality, and I determined to make amends for the unavowed churlishness of my reception. The young lady, replacing her mask, joined my ward in persuading me to return to the grounds, where the concert was soon to be renewed. We did so, and walked up and down the terrace that lies under the castle windows. Malaka became very intimate with us, and amused us with lively descriptions and stories of the most great people whom we saw upon the terrace. I liked her more and more every minute. Her gossip, without being ill-natured, was extremely diverting to me, who had been so long out of the great world. I thought what life she could give to us, sometimes lonely evenings at home. This ball was not over until the morning sun had almost reached the horizon. It pleased the Grand Duke to dance then. So loyal people could not go away or think of bed. We had just gone through the crowded saloon when my ward asked me what had become of Malaka. I thought she had been by her side and fancied she was by mine. The fact was, we had lost her. All of my efforts to find her were in vain. I feared that she had mistaken in the confusion a momentary separation from us, other people for her new friends, and had possibly pursued and lost them in the extensive grounds which were thrown open to us. Now, in its full force, I recognized a new folly of my having undertaken the charge of a young lady without so much as knowing her name, and fettered as I was by promises of the reasoning for my imposing which I knew nothing. I could not even point my inquiries by saying that the missing young lady was the daughter of the Countess, who had taken her departure a few hours before. Morning broke. It was clear daylight before I gave up my search. It was not till near 2 o'clock next day that we heard anything of my missing charge. At about that time, a servant knocked on my niece's door to say that she had been earnestly requested by a young lady who appeared to be in great distress to make out she could find the General Baron Spielsdorf and the young lady his daughter, in whose charge she had been left by her mother. There could be no doubt, notwithstanding the slight inaccuracy, that our friend had turned up, and so she had. Would heaven have lost her? Would to heaven we had lost her! She told my child a story to account for her having failed to recover us for so long. Very late, she said, she had got to the housekeeper's bedroom in despair of finding us, and had then fallen into a deep sleep, which, long as it was, had hardly sufficed to recruit her strength after the fatigues of the ball. That day, Malaka came to us, to our home. I was only too happy, after all, to have secured so charming a companion for my dear girl. End of chapter 12. I think I know what's happened. It all sounds very familiar. Okay, chapter 13. The Woodman. There soon, however, appeared some drawbacks. In the first place, Malaka complained of extreme languor. Who could that be? The weakness that remained after her late illness, and she never emerged from her room till afternoon was pretty far advanced. In the next place, it was accidentally discovered, although she always locked the door on the inside and never disturbed the key from its place till she admitted the maid to assist her at the toilet, that she had undoubtedly sometimes absent from her room in the very early morning, and at various times later in the day, before she wished it to be understood that she was stirring. She was repeatedly seen from the windows of the Schloss, in the first faint grey of the morning, walking through the trees in an easterly direction, and looking like a person in a trance. This convinced me that she walked in her sleep, but this hypothesis did not solve the puzzle. How did she pass out from her room, leaving the door locked on the inside? How did she escape from the house without unbarring door or window? In the midst of my perplexities, an anxiety of a far more urgent kind presented itself. My dear child began to lose her looks and health, and that manner in so mysterious and even horrible that I became thoroughly frightened. She was at first visited by appalling dreams, and then she fancied by a spectre, something resembling Malaka, sometimes in the shape of a beast indistinctly seen, walking around the foot of her bed from side to side. Lastly came sensations. One, not unpleasant, but very peculiar, she said, resembled the flow of an icy stream against her breast. At a later time, she felt something like a pair of large needles pierce her, a little below her throat, and with a very sharp pain. A few nights after followed a gradual and convulsive sense of strangulation. Then came unconsciousness. I could hear distinctly every word the kind old general was saying, because by the time we were driving upon the short grass that spread on either side of the road as you approached the roofless village, which had not shown the smoke of a chimney for more than half a century. You may guess how strangely I felt as I heard my own symptoms so exactly described in those which had been experienced by the poor girl who, but for catastrophe which followed, would have been at that moment a visitor at my father's chateau. You may suppose also how I felt as I heard him detail habits and mysterious peculiarities which were, in fact, those of our beautiful guest Carmilla. A vista opened in the forest. We were sudden under the chimneys and gables of the ruined village, and the towers and battlements of the dismantled castle, round which gigantic trees are grouped, overhung from a slight eminence. In a frightened dream, I got down from the carriage, and in silence, for we had each abundant matter for thinking. We soon mounted the ascent, and were among the spacious chambers, winding stairs, and dark corridors of the castle. "And this was once the palatial residence of the Karnsteins?" said the old general at length. From a great window he looked out across the village and saw the wide undulating expanse of forest. "It was a bad family, and here its blood-stained annals were written," he continued. "It is hard that they should, after death, continue to plague the human race with their atrocious lusts. That is the chapel of the Karnsteins down there." He pointed down to the grey walls of a Gothic building, partially visible through the foliage, a little way down the steep. "And I hear the axe of the woodman," he added, "busy among the trees that surround it. He possibly may give us the information of which I am in search, and point out the grave of Mircalla, Countess of Karnstein. These rustics preserve the These rustics preserve the long traditions of great families, whose stories die out among the rich and entitled so soon as the families themselves become extinct. We have a portrait at home of Makala, the Countess Kernstein. Should you like to see it? Asked my father. Time enough, dear friend, replied the general. I believe that I have seen the original, the one motive which has led me to you earlier than I first intended, was to explore the chapel which we are now approaching. What? See the Countess Makala? Exclaimed my father. Why, she has been dead more than a century. Not so dead as you fancy, I am told, answered the general. I confess, General, you puzzle me utterly, replied my father, looking at him. I fancied for a moment, with a return of suspicion I detected before, but although there was anger and detestation at times in the old general's manner, there was nothing flighty. I didn't skip a page there, did I? No. There remains to me, he said, as we passed under the heavy arch of the Gothic church for its dimensions that would have justified it being so styled, but one object which can interest me during the few years that remain to me on earth, and that is to wreak on her the vengeance which, I thank God, may still be accomplished by a mortal arm. What vengeance can you mean? Asked my father in increasing amazement. I mean to decapitate the monster, he answered, with a fierce flush, and a stamp that echoed mournfully through the hollow. And his clenched hand was at the same moment raised, as if it grasped the handle of an axe while he shook it ferociously in the air. What? Exclaimed my father, more than ever bewildered. To strike off her head. Cut off her head? Aye, with a hatchet, with a spade, or anything that can cleave through her murderous throat. You shall hear. He answered, trembling with rage, and hurried forward as he said, That beam will answer for a seat. Your dear child is fatigued. Let her be seated, and I will, in a few sentences, close my dreadful story. The squared block of wood which lay on the grass-grown pavement of the chapel formed a bench on which I was very glad to seat myself, and in the meantime the general called to the woodsman, who had been removing some boughs which leaned upon the old walls, and an axe in hand the hardy old fellow stood before us. He could not tell us anything of these moments, but there was an old man, he said, a ranger in the forest, at present sojourning in the house of the priest about 2 miles away, who could point out every monument of the old Kernstein family, and for a trifle he undertook to bring back with him, if we could lend him one of our horses, in a little more than half an hour. Have you been long employed about this forest? Asked my father of the old man. I have been a woodman here, he answered in his patois, under the foresters all my day, so is my father before me, and so on, and generations I can count. I can show you the very house in the village in which my ancestors lived. How came the village to be deserted? Asked the general. It was troubled by revenants, sir. Several were tracked to their graves. They are detected by the usual tests and extinguished in the usual way, by decapitation, by the stake, and by burning, and not until many of the villagers were killed. But after all these proceedings, according to law, he continued, so many graves opened and so many vampires deprived of that horrible animation, the village was not relieved. But by a Movarian nobleman who happened to be travelling this way, heard how many were, and being very skilled, as many people are in his country, in such affairs, he offered to deliver the village from its tormentor. So did it thus. There being a bright moon that night, he ascended shortly after the sunset the towers of the chapel here, from whence he could distinctly see the churchyard beneath him. You can see it from that window. From this point he watched until he saw a vampire coming out of the graves, and place it near the linen clothes in which he had been folded, and then glided away towards the village to plague its inhabitants. The strangers, having seen all this, came down from the steeple, took the linen wrappings of the vampire and carried them up to the top of the tower, which he again mounted. When the vampire returned from his prowlings and missed his clothes, he cried furiously to the Moravian, who he saw at the summit of the tower, and who in reply beckoned him to ascend and take them. Whereupon the vampire, accepting his invitation, began to climb the steeple, and so soon as he reached the battlements, the Moravian, with a stroke of his sword, clove his skull in twain, hurling him down to the churchyard, whither descending by the winding stairs the stranger followed and cut his head off. The next day delivered it to the body to the villagers, who duly impaled and burned them. This Moravian nobleman had authority from the then head of the family, to remove the tomb of Makala, Countess Kernstein, which he did eventually, so that in the little while its site was quite forgotten. Can you point to where it stood? Asked the general, eagerly. The forester shook his head and smiled. Not a living soul could tell you that now, he said. Besides, they say her body was removed, but no one is sure of that either. Having thus spoken, as time pressed, he dropped his axe and departed, leaving us to hear the remainder of the general's strange story. Ba-bam, that is the end of chapter 13. Spoopy. It's coming to a head now, I feel. Okay, chapter 14. The meeting. My beloved child, he resumed, was now growing rapidly worse. The physician who attended her had failed to produce the slightest impression on her disease, for such I then suppose it to be. He saw my alarm and suggested a consultation. I called an abler physician from Graz. Several days elapsed before he arrived. He was a good and pious as well as a learned man. Having seen my poor ward together, they withdrew to the library and to confer and discuss. I, from the adjourning room, where I awaited their summons, heard these two gentlemen's voices raised in something sharper than a strictly philosophical discussion. I knocked at the door and entered. Thank you, Anonymous. It's a very big door. I've lost my place on the page. Where was I knocking? I knocked on the door and entered. I found the old physician from Graz maintaining his theory. His rival was combating it with undisguised ridicule, accompanied with bursts of laughter. This unseemly manifestation subsided, and the altercation ended on my entrance. Sir, said my physician, my learned brother seems to think that you want a conjurer, not a doctor. Pardon me, said the old physician from Graz, looking displeased. I shall state my own view on the case in my own way another time. I grieve, Monsieur le Général, that by my skill and science I can be of no use. Before I go, I shall do myself the honour to suggest something to you. He seemed thoughtful and sat down at the table and began to write. Profoundly disappointed, I made my bow, and as I turned to go, the other doctor pointed over his shoulder to his companion who was writing, and then with a shrug significantly touched his forehead. This consultation then left me precisely where I was. I walked out into the grounds, all but distracted. The doctor from Graz, in 10 or 15 minutes, overtook me. He apologized for having followed me, but said he could not go consciously take his leave without a few words more. He told me that he could not be mistaken. No natural disease exhibited the same symptoms, and that death was already very near. There remained, however, a day or possibly 2 of life. If the fatal seizure were at once arrested with the great care and skill, her strength might possibly return, but all hung now upon the confines of the irrevocable. One more assault might extinguish the last spark of vitality, which is every moment ready to die. And what is the nature of the seizure you speak of? I entreated. I have stated all fully this in the note, which I place in your hands upon the distinct condition that you send for the nearest clergyman and open my letter in his presence, and on no account read it till he is with you. You would despise it all else. And it is a matter of life and death. Should the priest fail you, then indeed you may read it. He asked before taking his leave finally whether I would wish to see a man curiously learned upon the very subject which, after I read his letter, which would probably interest me above all else, and he urged me earnestly to invite him to visit him there, and so took his leave. The ecclesiastic was absent, and I read the letter by myself. At another time or in another case, it might have excited my ridicule, but into what quackeries will not people rush for their last chance, where all accustomed means have failed and the life of a beloved object is at stake? Nothing, you will say, could be more absurd than the learned man's letter. It was monstrous enough to have consigned him to a madhouse. He said that the patient was suffering from the visits of a vampire. The punctures of which she described as having occurred near the throat were, he insisted, the insertions of 2 long, thin and sharp teeth, which is as well known and peculiar to vampires. And there could be no doubt, he added, as to the well-defined presence of the small livid mark, which all concurred in describing as that induced by the demon's lips, and every symptom described by the sufferer was in exact conformity with those recorded in every case of a similar visitation. Being myself wholly sceptical as to the existence of any such portent as the vampire, the supernatural theory of the good doctor furnished, in my opinion, but another instance of learning and intelligence oddly associated with some half-hallucination. I was so miserable, however, that rather than nothing, I acted upon my instructions of the letter. I concealed myself in the dark dressing room that opened upon the poor patient's room. It was in which a candle was burning, and watched there till she fell asleep. I stood at the door, peeping through the small crevice, my sword laid on the table. Beside me, as my directions prescribed, until a little after 1, I saw a large black object, very ill-defined, crawl, as it seemed to me, over the foot of the bed, and swiftly spread itself up to the poor girl's throat, where it swelled in a moment into a great palpitating mess. For a few moments I stood petrified. I now sprang forward, with my sword in hand. The black creature suddenly contracted towards the foot of the bed, gliding over it and standing on the door about a yard below the foot of the bed, with a glare of the skulking ferocity and horror that fixed on me. I saw Malaka. Speculating I know not what, I struck at her instantly with my sword, but I saw her standing near the door, unscathed. Horrified, I pursued, and struck again. She was gone, and my sword flew to shivers against the door. I can't describe to you all that passed on that horrible night. The whole house was up and stirring. The spectre Malaka was gone, but her victim was sinking fast, and before the morning dawn, she died. The old general was agitated. We did not speak to him. My father walked some distance and began reading the inscriptions on the tombstone, and thus occupied, he strolled into the door to the side of the chapel and to prosecute his researches. The general leaned against the wall, dried his eyes, and sighed heavily. I was relieved on hearing the voices of Carmilla and Madame, who were at that moment approaching. The voices died away. In this solitude, having just listened to so strange a story, connected as it was with the great and titled dead, whose monuments were mouldering among the dust and the ivy round us, and every incident of which bore so awfully upon my own mysterious case, in this haunted spot, darkened by the towering foliage that rose on every side, dense and high above its noiseless walls, a horror began to steal over me, and my heart sank as I thought that my friends were, after all, not about to enter and disturb this triste and ominous scene. The old general's eyes were fixed on the ground as he leaned with his hand upon the basement of the shattered monument. Under a narrow arched doorway surmounted by one of those demoniacal grotesques in which the cynical and the ghastly fancy of old Gothic carvings delight, I saw very gladly the beautiful face and figure of Carmilla enter the shadowy chapel. I was about to rise and speak, and nodded smiling in answer to her peculiarly engaging smile, when with a cry the old man by my side caught up the woodman's hatchet and started forward. On seeing him, a brutalized charge came over her features. It was an instantaneous and horrible transformation, as she made a crouching step backwards. Before I could utter a scream, he struck at her with all his force, but she dived under his blow, and unscathed caught him in her tiny grasp by the wrist. He struggled for a moment to release his arm, but his hand opened and the axe fell to the ground and the girl was gone. He staggered against the wall, his grey hair stood up upon his head, and a moisture shone over his face as if he were at the point of death. The frightful scene had passed in a moment. The first thing I recollect after is Madame standing before me and impatiently repeating again and again the question, "Where is Mademoiselle Carmilla?" I answered at length, "I don't know. I can't tell. She went there." And I pointed to the door through which Madame had just entered, only a minute or two since. But I have been standing there in the passage ever since Mademoiselle Carmilla entered, and she did not return. She She then began to call Carmilla through every door and passage from the windows, but no one came. She called herself Carmilla, said the general, still agitated. Carmilla? Yes, I answered. Aye, that is Malarkey. Malarkey? That is Malaka. That is the same person who long ago was called Malaka, Countess Kernstein. Depart from this accursed ground, my poor child, as quickly as you can. Drive to the clergyman's house and stay there till we come. Begone. May you never behold Carmilla more. You will not find her here. End of chapter 14. I feel like I could have used more sound effects in this, but I don't know if any were relevant. There's just spooky ambience. Maybe I could use that. Scary noise? What's that? Oh. Spooky. Oh. Okay. It's praising for the scream. Oh, thank you. Another little hydrate. Why not? Okay. Chapter 15. Ordeal and Execution. As he spoke, one of the strangest-looking men I ever beheld entered the chapel at the door through which Carmilla had made her entrance and her exit. He was tall, narrow-chested, stooping, with high shoulders and dressed in black. His face was brown and dried in with the deep furrows. He wore an oddly shaped hat with a broad leaf. His hair, long and grizzled, hung on his shoulders. He wore a pair of gold spectacles and walked slowly, with an odd shambling gait, with his face sometimes turned up to the sky and sometimes bowed down towards the ground, seeming to wear a perpetual smile. His long, thin arms were swinging, and his lank hands in old black gloves, ever so much too wide for them, waving and gesticulating in utter abstraction. "The very man!" exclaimed the general, advancing with manifest delight. "My dear Baron, how happy I am to see you. I had no hope of meeting you so soon." He signed to my father, who had by this very time returned, and leading the fantastic old gentleman, whom he had called the Baron, to meet him, he introduced him formally, and they at once entered into earnest conversation. The stranger took a roll of paper from his pocket and spread it out on the worn surface of a tomb that stood by. He had a pencil case in his fingers, with which he traced imaginary lines from point to point on the paper, which from their often glancing from it together at certain points of the building, I concluded to be a plan of the chapel. He accompanied what I may term his lecture with occasional readings from a dirty little book whose yellow leaves were closely written over. They sauntered together down the side aisle, opposite to the spot where I was standing, conversing as they went. Then they began measuring the distances by paces, and finally they all stood together, facing a piece of the sidewall, which they began to examine with great minuteness, pulling off the ivy that clung over it and rapping the plasters with ends of their sticks, scraping here and knocking there. At length they ascertained the existence of a broad marble tablet with letters carved in relief upon it. With the assistance of the woodman, who soon returned, a monumental inscription and carved execution, maybe, were disclosed. They proved to be those of the long-lost monument of Mercala, Countess Kernstein. The old general, though I fear given to be the praying mood, raised his hands and eyes to the heaven in mute thanksgiving for some moments. "Tomorrow," I heard him say, "the commissioner will be here, and the inquisition will be held according to the law." Then turning to the old man with the gold spectacles whom I have described, he shook him warmly by both hands and said, "Baron, how can I thank you? How can we all thank you? You will have delivered this region from a plague that has scourged its inhabitants for more than a century. The horrible enemy, thank God, is at last tracked." My father led the stranger aside, and the general followed. I know that he had led them out of hearing, that he might relate my case, and I saw them glance often quickly at me as the discussion proceeded. My father came to me, kissed me again and again, and leading me from the chapel said, "It is time to return. But before we go, we must add to our party the good priest, who lives but a little away from this, and persuade him to accompany us to the Schloss. In this quest we were successful, and I was glad, being unspeakably fatigued when we reached home. But my satisfaction was changed to dismay on discovering that there were no tidings of Carmilla. Of the scene that had occurred in the ruined chapel, no explanation was offered to me, and it was clear that it was a secret which my father for the present determined to keep from me. The sinister absence of Carmilla made the remembrance of this scene more horrible to me. The arrangements for the night were singular. 2 servants and Madame were to sit up in my room that night, and the ecclesiastic with my father kept watch in the adjoining dressing room. The priest had performed certain solemn rites that night, the purport of which I did not understand any more than I comprehended the reason of this extraordinary precaution taken for my safety during sleep. I saw all clearly a few days later. The disappearance of Carmilla was followed by the discontinuation of my nightly sufferings. You have heard, no doubt, of the appalling superstition that prevails in the Upper and Lower Styria, in Moravia, Silesia, and Turkish Serbia, in Poland, even in Russia, the superstition, so we must call it, of the vampire. In human testimony taken with every care and solemnity, judicially before commissions innumerable, each consisting of many members, all chosen for integrity and intelligence, in constituting reports of voluminous perhaps than exist upon any one of other class of cases, is worth anything. It is difficult to deny or even to doubt the existence of such a phenomenon as a vampire. For my part, I have heard no theory by which to explain what I myself have witnessed and experienced, other than supplied by the ancient and well-attested belief of the country. The next day, the formal proceedings took place in the chapel of Kernstein, and the grave of the Countess Miss Makala was opened, and the general and my father recognized each in his perfidious and beautiful guest in the face now disclosed to view. The features, though 150 years had passed since her funeral, were tinted with the warmth of life. Her eyes were open. No cadaverous smell exhaled from the coffin. The 2 medical men, one officially present and the other on part of the promoter of inquiry, attested the marvelous fact that there was a faint but appreciable respiration and a corresponding action of the heart. The limbs were perfectly flexible, the flesh elastic, and the leaden coffin floated with blood, in which to depth of 7 inches the body lay immersed. Here, then, were all the admitted signs and proofs of vampirism. The body, therefore, in accordance with the ancient practice, was raised, and a sharp stake driven through the heart of the vampire, who uttered... Where is it? Who uttered a piercing scream. Maybe more this one. Who uttered a piercing scream. At the moment, in all respects, such as night escaped from a living person in their last agony. Then the head... where is it? Then the head was struck off. That wasn't very... That's more squeeched off. I don't think I have a chop. I have chains. I don't have a chop. That's fine. It doesn't work. Then the head was struck off, and a torrent of blood flowed from the severed neck. The body and head was next placed on a pile of wood and reduced to ashes, which were thrown upon the river and borne away, and that territory has never since been plagued by the visits of a vampire. My father has a copy of the report of the Imperial Commission with all the signatures of those present at these proceedings, attached in verification of the statement. It is from this official paper that I have summarized my account of this last shocking scene. Chapter 6. Conclusion. I write all this, you suppose, with composure, but far from it. I cannot think of it without agitation. Nothing but your earnest desire, so repeatedly expressed, could have induced me to sit down to a task that has unstrung my nerves for months to come, and reinduced a shadow of the unspeakable horror which years after my deliverance continued to make my days and nights dreadful and solitude insupportably terrific. Let me add a word or two about that quaint Baron Vordenberg, to whose curious lore we were indebted for the discovery of the Countess Mercalla's grave. He had taken up his abode in Graz, where living upon a mere pittance, which was all that remained to him of the once princely estate of his family in Upper Styria, he devoted himself to the minute and laborious investigation of the marvellously authentic tradition of vampirism. He had at his fingers' ends all of the great and little works upon the subject. Magia Posthuma, Phlegon de Mirabilis, by Christopher Herrenberg, and 1,000 others, among which I only remember a few of those which he lent to my father. He had a voluminous digest of all the judicial cases from which he had extracted a system of principles that appear to govern, some always and others occasionally only, the condition of the vampire. I may mention in passing that the deadly pallor attributed to the sort of revenants is a mere melodramatic fiction. They present in the grave, and when they show themselves in human society, they appear of healthy life. When disclosed to light in their coffins, they exhibit all the symptoms that are enumerated as those which prove the vampire life of the long-dead Countess Kernstein. How they escaped from their graves and returned to them for certain hours every day without displacing the clay or leaving any trace of disturbance in the state of the coffin or the cement or the cerements, and always been admitted to an utterly has always been admitted to be utterly inexplicable. The amphibious existence of the vampire is sustained by daily renewed slumber in the grave. Its horrible lust for living blood supplies the vigor of its waking existence. The vampire is prone to be fascinated with an engrossing vehemence resembling the passion of love by particular persons. In pursuit of these, it will exercise inexhaustible patience and stratagems for access to a particular object which may be obstructed in hundreds of ways. It will never desist until it has been satiated its passion and drained the very life of its coveted victim. But it will, in these cases, husband and protract its murderous enjoyment with the refinement of an epicure and heightened by the gradual approaches of an artful courtship. In these cases, it seems to yearn for something like sympathy and consent. In ordinary ones, it goes direct to its object, overpowers with violence, and strangles and exhausts often at least a single feast. The vampire is apparently subject in certain situations to special conditions, in the particular insistence of which I have given you relations. Mercalla seemed to be limited to a name, which, if not her real one, should be at least reproduced without the omissions or addition of a single letter, those, as we say, anagrammatically, which compose it. Carmilla did this. So did Milaka. My father related to the Baron Vordenberg, who remained with us for 2 or 3 weeks after the expulsion of Carmilla, the story of the Moravian nobleman and the vampire at the Kernstein churchyard. And then he asked the Baron how he had discovered the exact position of the long-concealed tomb of the Countess Mercalla. The Baron's grotesque features puckered up into a mysterious smile. He looked down, still smiling on his worn spectacles, and fumbled with it. Then looking up, he said, "I have many journals and other papers written by that remarkable man. The most curious among them is treating of the visit of which you speak to Kernstein. The tradition, of course, discolours and distorts a little. He may have been termed a Moravian nobleman, for he has changed his abode to that territory and was besides a noble. But he was in truth a native of Upper Styria. It is enough to say that in very early youth he had been a passionate and favoured lover of the beautiful Mercalla, Countess Kernstein. Her early death plunged him into inconsolable grief. It is the nature of vampires to increase and multiply, but according to ascertained and ghostly law. Assuming at starting a territory perfectly free from that pest, how does it begin and how does it multiply itself? I will tell you. A person more or less wicked puts an end to himself. A suicide under certain circumstances becomes a vampire. That spectre visits living people in their slumbers. They die and almost invariably in the grave develop into vampires. This happened in the case of the beautiful Mercalla, who was haunted by one of those demons. My ancestor, Vordenberg, whose title I still bear, soon discovered this, and in the course of the studies to which he devoted himself, learned a great deal more. Among other things, he concluded that the suspicion of vampirism would probably fall sooner or later upon the dead countess, who in life had been his idol. He conceived a horror, be she what she might, of her remains being profaned by the outrage of a posthumous execution. He was left a curious paper to prove that the vampire, on its expulsion from the amphibious existence, is projected into a far more horrible life, and he resolved to save his once beloved Makala from this. He adopted the stratagem of a journey here, and pretended removal of her remains and a real obliteration of her monument. When age had stolen upon him, and from the veil of years, he looked back on the scenes he was leaving and considered in a different spirit what he had done, and a horror took possession of him. He made the tracings and notes which have guided me to this very spot, and drew up a confession of the deception that he had practiced. If he had intended any further action in this matter, death prevented him, and the hand of the remote descendant has too late for many, directed the pursuit of the lair to the beast. We talked a little more, and among other things he said was this. One sign of the vampire is the power of the hand. The slender hand of Makala closed like the vice of steel on the general's wrist when he raised the hatchet to strike. But its power is not confined to its grasp. It leaves a numbness in the limb it seizes, which is slowly, if ever, recovered from. The following spring, my father took me on a tour through Italy. We remained away for more than a year. It was long before the terror of recent events subsided, and to this hour the image of Carmilla returns to my memory with ambiguous alterations. Sometimes the playful, languid, beautiful girl, sometimes the writhing fiend I saw in the ruined church, and often from the reverie I have started fancying I heard the light step of Carmilla at the drawing-room door. The end. There you go. Boop, 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 boop. That was Carmilla. Still yearning. Still yearning for her woman, her little girlfriend, vampire. Oh. So vampires are real? Yeah, that was it's actually a non-fiction book. There you go. Oh, I've never sat and read a book in one go like that. Well, other than children's books, I guess. I was curious to see how I would get on with it. But I hope you all enjoyed it. I hope my not being able to read words very good. Yeah, when I was reading the description of the vampire and it was like, taller than the average woman with long, thick hair, I was like, huh? Excusez-moi? Yeah, I'm not very good at it was like the language of it. I hope it was easy enough to follow. But there were some sentences where it just said, like, there's just there's so many, like, commas, and I'm getting confused as to what the different, like, this is all one sentence. The beds were, I thought, all empty and around the room without anyone but myself in it, and I, after looking after about me for some time and admiringly, especially in an iron candlestick with 2 branches, which I should certainly know again, crept under one of the beds to reach the window, but as I got from under... Like, that's half the sentence. I was just like, huh? There's like 3 semicolons, 4 hyphens, and like 8 commas. I'm just like, break up your sentences. But I got the gist of it, and I guess that's what it's about, isn't it? Just getting the gist of the writing. Now do it in the original Irish. Oh my goodness. But the good news is that we're on exactly £1,000 for the fundraiser. So we're actually like two days ahead in terms of the 100 a day goal. And that's 10 centimeters. That's a third of the way there. And if you just do that twice more, then I can donate it. Wow. The sentences are unending, just like vampires. Yes. Oh, I think that would be about my limit of book length, though, because my throat is like... Spilled my water down myself. Right. I think the other two books that I've picked out, one of them is like slightly... Yeah, 10 centimeters from the root. I'm going to Pac-Man hair it. Hydrate. Oh, thank you. Little sippy. Which I didn't spill down myself this time. But if you would like me to do this again, I would be... I'd be up for it. The other book I was thinking of doing was Sleepy Hollow, which I think is maybe a bit shorter. And maybe I could find more. 108 pages. How many was this? 113. So pretty much the same length. So that would be doable. And I think maybe that one doesn't have any... I don't know if Sleepy Hollow has as many characters in it. Because it would have that thing where it would have the conversations and it would be between 3 different people and it wasn't saying who was talking. So I was like, I don't know whether to do a voice. I mean, I obviously wasn't really doing voices. It was just like trying to differentiate it slightly. But I was like, I don't know who's talking. I don't know who's talking right now. but yes, hopefully it wasn't too distracting. I mean, it was distracting for me to who was talking, but hopefully it wasn't too distracting that you could still follow the general flow of it. I did like the hand-holding. That's like third base, right? What base is vampire bite? Well, what do you get to there? Right. I guess I shall do this. And I shall find a place to send you to. But yeah, I wasn't sure. Her father did need to lower her dress by an inch. Oh, that was very raunchy. I think, was this book banned? Was Carmilla banned at any point? It was not banned. Rather, the 1872 novella's explicitly lesbian themes for at the time was very controversial. It was just seen as controversial. But it wasn't, but yeah, it wasn't, I guess maybe they didn't ban books in those days. Anyway, I'm rambling now. It does make me laugh how, because I knew that this was like a, had lesbian undertones or overtones. And I said to Kirsty, like, oh, will I be okay reading it on stream? And she was just like, yeah, it's very much of its time. It's not like smut. It's just there's a bit of hugging and a kiss on the cheek. There's not, it's not, I'm not going to be reading anything that I'm like, oh, I blush to read this. But yes. Read Sarah Waters. Oh my goodness. Right. But it's nice having something that is out of public domain. But I think I would prefer something with maybe like a slightly easier to read, because I fumbled over a lot of words.
Shit, am I stuck?
Oh. That was a swear. I'll send you over to Rythian, because Kirsty and Rythian are streaming together today. But yeah, I think some of the words were like a bit... It was a bit confusing for me. Sleepy Hollow is not easier to read. Oh, well, I'll be stumbling over that as well. But I'll just try my darndest. We'll see how it gets on. But it'd be nice to do this for Christmas as well. Read some of the old classic ghostly stories. But yes, right. Read. Brilliant. I gave up on Sleepy Hollow. Oh my gosh. I'll read it at you. You have to... then you have to read it. And I can mark off another book on my Goodreads, which is the secret goal of this stream, is to get my Goodreads, my Goodreads score up. The esophagogastroduodenoscopy strikes again. Is that how it said? I don't know. Can I mark it off too? Yeah. If you listen to all of the book, you get to mark it all off on your Goodreads. And then we'll do a little book club about it. Sorted. Well, everyone, I shall say bye. I'm going to go to karaoke now. My voice is not going to get rested whatsoever. I'm going to go and make it worse. But I shall speak to you all soon. I hope you have lovely evenings. I'll be back tomorrow with the bunnies in the morning. And until then, bye-bye for now. Bye-bye.